great nation.
Take a look at what happened. I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in.
An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Only farms over the value of £3 million will be affected by the changes.
Well, hello, good morning to you on this glorious Friday. Spring has sprung, the grass has riz. I wonder where them boydies is. It really does feel like winter is over, doesn't it? I don't know if that's the case where you are, but I've had a little sort of, bounce in my step for the last few days because I've been seeing the sun. It feels like coming out of some sort of nuclear winter and glaring into like the future going, oh, it's not going to be so bad after all. But is it? That might not be how Reform members are feeling today, as what appears to be, let's say, a little disagreement between one of their most high-profile MPs, Rupert Lowe, and party leader Nigel Farage is being, well, carefully examined in the newspapers, let's say. What is going on there? And also, what is going on with these new sentencing guidelines? Oh, two-tier Keir doesn't like it, does he? Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, is threatening the Sentencing Guidelines Council with saying, you can't write this. This is going to make us look really bad, saying that people from ethnic minorities should be treated differently from others, having softer sentences. I completely disagree with that. And then you find out, actually, that these new sentencing guidelines actually come from a report that David Lammy had written. Of course they do. So much to talk about today, so do stay tuned. I am with you until 1 o'clock. This is, of course, Talk, the home of common sense. Now, I want you to get in touch with your thoughts and feelings about everything we're talking about today. Throw me your 2-bit. The number to call 0344 499 1000. That is your standard network rate. So basically the same as calling, I don't know, anybody, really. Nothing. It's all built into your package, so what are you waiting for? You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message instead, or indeed leave me a voice note. 87222 is the number for text. And you have to write the word talk before your message. That way it wends its way through all of the junk floating around in space, smashing past old Russian satellites and space detritus that nobody cares about, unseen and undetected in the cosmos. But it will get in the way of your text if you don't write talk before your message. We're on X at talkTV. OK, let's jump to it, shall we? And let's welcome to the show Baroness Claire Fox, independent peer and the director of the Academy of Ideas, but also, and I think significantly, to our very top story, a former Brexit Party MEP, as was I. Claire, great to have you on the programme. Now, there's been this sort of, let's say, a ding-dong, or what might appear to be a ding-dong, between party leader Nigel Farage and very high-profile MP Rupert Lowe, where Rupert has taken to the newspapers, done an interview with Andrew Pearce, whose handle is Tory Boy Pearce, to sort of say that, you know, Nigel is messianic, he's a big leader, but he's worried, let's say, about how the party's going in terms of the way it's operating and functioning. And, of course, because Rupert spoke to the press have been asking Nigel about this. And, well, let's have a listen to what Harry Cole said when, what Nigel said to Harry Cole when asked about this yesterday.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? If I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
Wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Rupert Lowe, will he still be a Reform MP by the next election? What do you reckon?
Well, I hope so, but he seems to be taking a tone that says he might not accept us, but there you are.
Righto then, let's get the opinions of Baroness Claire Fox on all of this. Claire, let's unpack what's going on here. I think it's worthwhile putting a disclaimer out that it's very much the Tory adjacent press that seems to be wanting to pull at this thread. But do you think Rupert Lowe has a point?
So the most important thing for me is this is distasteful and irritating, because the rise of reform is hugely important politically in terms of giving people an opportunity to express their absolute contempt for the way they've been treated by the two main parties. And I think that's really exciting. So I can't bear it when these kind of internal spats take away from that, because actually the electorate won't forgive anyone if they mess it up. But it's also the case that I've been saying this for a while, it's almost as though the rise of reform is not because of Rupert Lowe, but it's also not because of Nigel Farage. It's the vehicle through which people want to express their absolute desire to change politics for good, to have a different kind of politics. And so in that way, I really would like everybody's egos to calm down. I know that the Tories will make hay of this. Why would you? You can't blame them for that. Everyone will make hay of it. But the way that I think whenever there's people I know and love or am involved in politically get completely consumed with themselves, I remind them of the outside world. I mean, my God, there's a lot to talk about. And if we could focus the minds of Reform MPs and their core team on resolving and coming up with some clear views on what on earth is happening in an ever-changing world, I think then the energy would be better spent doing that than, you know, these kind of internal issues, which I'm just, to be honest, not interested in. And I think it distracts from a much bigger project.
I mean, is that not what's going on here, though? I mean, I'm always sceptical when I see these things in any political party, when you start getting the Westminster chatter about there's been a fallout, there's been divisions, and journalists rushing to speak to one side, rushing to speak to the other, trying to make more copy out of it. And you have to think to yourself, what is the motivation here? Because we all know, don't we? You know, you just have to be in a relationship to someone to know that people bicker, that people don't always sing off the same hymn sheet, that there's always a bit of a power dynamic in any relationship, who gets to control the TV remote even. And then, like you said, when this stuff is sort of becomes the focus, a distraction, it's very handy for political opponents.
Of course it is, but it's also up to you to not get distracted. That's the point I'm making. I agree. Of course opponents are going to use it. I appreciate that if Reform are under enormous pressure, they've only got 5 MPs, and they've got to perform as though they're a government in waiting in many ways that puts them under strains that others don't have. We know that there's lots of squabbling in the Labour Party. There's lots of squabbling in the Tories. That's all true. But it's also the responsibility of reform to rise above that. And in that sense, I don't want to be completely... I'm not going to just say, oh, they're doing really well and it's all the Tory media's fault, because that's just not true, right? Sometimes what you have to do, and let's be honest, the rise of Trump, some of the Trump J.D. Vance stuff I can cheer for in terms of the free speech, the executive orders on sex versus gender, all of these things are great, but it's more difficult with what's happening internationally, particularly in relation to Ukraine and Russia. I know it's hard to know what to say, right? But you do have an obligation to say it. You can't just keep avoiding it. And so consequently, I'm saying that the energy of the Reform MPs and their advisors would be to sit down and work through some very important key thoughts on those issues, even if those key thoughts, by the way, are caveated in by the need to be diplomatic and not be surly, not to put your foot in and so on. But that's what I would want to see the energy on. And I also want to stress, as I said, one of the things I didn't like about both what Rupert and what Nigel said was the implication was that either of them or both of them were somehow responsible entirely, or, you know, deciding who, for the rise of reform. And what I'm saying is, no, history has given us a moment where the British electorate have rightly seen through the thinness of the Labour Party in government, and it's not been in government for a long time, and the Conservative Party were a busted flush in many ways. They just haven't been able to pull it together.
And this is the problem, isn't it? The general public...
Isn't it wonderful that people feel they have a vehicle like reform? So don't blow it, reform, is my message. Don't blow it by talking about yourselves or thinking it's all to do with you. Think about the voters.
And if there's one thing that we all know, voters are sick to death of internecine party warfare. They've lived through enough of that with the Conservative Party, changing their leader every 5 seconds, and actually want to have that sense of stability when they're picking a party to support. Let's talk now about sentencing guidelines, because when I first saw this story, every now and then, in the madness that is the 21st century, something pops up on X, and you immediately go, that's got to be fake news. No, that can't be real. And I remember seeing this post saying that, you know, the new sentencing guidelines say that people from ethnic minorities should essentially be given softer sentences. And I read this out and my other half went, I mean, I can imagine it to be true, but surely that's not a thing. That didn't actually happen. So I looked at it and I was like, no, that has happened. And you think to yourself, how on earth have we reached a stage where this stuff is just sort of, you know, put into motion? I mean, at least now you've got Shabana Mahmood saying, we don't want this, this is not how our legal system should work, as Justice Secretary. But this was based on some sort of report by David Lammy. I wonder how sincere the Labour Party are in rejecting this. I think they probably quite want this these guidelines to be put in place, but they know how toxic it would be for their polling.
Actually, I have to give some credit to Shabana Mahmood, because she's actually been not a bad Justice Secretary on quite a number of things she's said, and she doesn't seem to like identity politics. So as we were just talking about tensions in parties, I would imagine there's some tensions within the Labour Party on this very question, but I do give her some credit. I like you can't believe it. This is like a kind of what people used to call the kind of caricatured Daily Mail story you thought when you read it, and then you discover it's the policy, and you can't believe that we've got to such a point where, because of identity, and by the way, it's not just ethnic identity, it's cultural identity. You can imagine that's some kind of nod to kind of religious identity, and also, by the way, transgender perpetrators as well. So, I mean, you know, it ticks all the boxes of everything that shouldn't happen. It's totally patronising, by the way, because we end up in a situation where you actually, if you want to be a full citizen of this country and to be shown that you're not being, you know, in a way it's racist to say that you would be given anything other than equal treatment. And equal treatment under the law, and that includes in sentencing, must be part of that. It's very important that we absolutely oppose this. People are right. This is something I would want and hope that reform would really get their act together on as much as anything else. as we were just talking about them, I think it's really important that we also identified the main scandal here, which is not David Lammy's old report, which to be honest, was always politicised identitarian nonsense, but actually the fact that there is a sentencing council, an independent sentencing council that the government can't overturn. So the government, actually under Blair and Brown, then actually given extra powers by Cameron when he was leading the country, and subsequently now we have the new Labour government. This sentencing council can make a decision that the government can't overturn. This is the worst nightmare of quangocracy. And what we need to see from the government, and everyone should be demanding this, is an emergency piece of legislation to get rid of the powers of the sentencing council to be able to make these decisions without democratic accountability. The same, by the way, I would say about the independent climate change committee. These bodies exist as though they're godlike, but they were actually created by governments as a way of them ring-fencing away decision-making into the hands of experts away from the electorate. And it has to be the electorate, the public, who make their views known on how sentences are taking place, tell that to politicians who then enact on it. Not have some body over there making the decisions that you can't overturn. It's scary.
It is, yeah, no, they're baked into the system very deliberately, aren't they, to try and sort of ring fence a sort of set of beliefs that aren't supposed to be challenged. Because then also you've got the OBR going, well, you can't cut taxes. Or you've got the Climate Change Commission going, well, you know, the world's going to burst into flames unless you put this in. And supposedly they're all independents, but basically what they are the guard dogs to left-wing policy. But do you think we've actually kind of reached peak woke? Because I remember the feeling I got of reassurance and comfort when Trump was re-elected to the White House, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is now the vanguard of political change, that there will be this tidal wave now of undoing some of the most destructive elements of, let's say, sort of global progressivism, the supranational leftism that the whole of the West has been entangled in. It's going to be very hard to stop that tidal wave crashing through the whole of the West. Do you feel like, you know, that is beginning to happen now? And even the Labour Party are having to potentially act against their instincts because they know that public opinion has moved and moved irrevocably?
Well, I think one of the difficulties is that public opinion had moved a long, long time ago, but the elites hadn't moved with it. And I think that what the Trump administration has done, if nothing else, is it's actually created a space for a debate on these issues in Europe, in a way. Every European country now has to at least acknowledge that it might be more awkward. Well, we have to note two things. In America, they've gone great strides at naming the problem and saying they're going to deal with it. But actually, there's lots and lots of legal challenges. Some institutions are simply changing the name, for example, of equity, diversity and inclusion to just another name, but going along with these problems. And in the UK, you cannot underestimate the institutional capture, that phrase being a bit cliched, but where it's almost as though we've just said a government can proclaim, look, we don't go down the identity politics route here. But then you find that, I don't know, the NHS is absolutely riven with trans ideology, for example, absolutely committed. And they've bedded that in to all of their policies and their rules. People are still being sent on training courses in how to be better, inclusive, more inclusive, and so on. And we know that those equality, diversity, and inclusion words are absolutely Orwellian doublespeak.
Right.
That inclusion is inclusion, but exclusion of any view that is different to themselves. Diversity never includes opinion diversity and so on and so forth. And it's the opposite of equality, as we've discovered from this.
It is newspeak, as George Orwell would say. Claire, it's always wonderful catching up with you, Baroness Claire Fox, ladies and gentlemen. You know, it's interesting what Claire's saying. We need the bonfire of the quangos. I think she was very articulately making that point. It's about time we stopped the slow strangulation of the rainbow lanyard as well. Right, now, coming up after the break, all Eurostar trains between London and Paris are cancelled. That is after an unexploded Second World War bomb was found near train tracks. We'll be getting the latest from Simon Calder after this.
as Putin's eyeing up Trump, and we're committing all sorts of pledges of planes in the sky and troops on the ground in Ukraine, it kind of, from where I'm sitting, looks like we are woefully underprepared for all of these promises we're making. We're writing cheques we can't cash.
I mean, I have absolute confidence in our forces. If we ask them to do something, they'll be able to do it. What I want to have the ability to do is to make sure that we're equipping them with the very best equipment that learns the lessons from Ukraine. That's not about how Ukrainians fight, that is also about how Russians fight.
Well, hello there. Welcome back to the show. It's your opportunity to get in touch with me as well in just a moment. So let me know what you think about anything that we've been talking about just now. 03444 99 1000 is the number to call. You can use that number to send me a WhatsApp message as well, or indeed leave me a cheeky little voice note that I can play out on the airways for all to enjoy. You can text me 87222. Remember to write the word talk before your message. That way it wings its little route through to ping the aerials on top of Talk Towers here. And we're on X at talkTV. OK, but before we talk about that, let's instead have a little travel update. Normally, I'm not too bothered about what goes on the Eurostar, or not since leaving the European Parliament when my life kind of depended on it. But this is a funny little story, isn't it? All Eurostar trains between London and Paris have been cancelled. No, the French aren't on strike. No, there's not a migrant on the tracks. No, it's because actually there's a Second World War bomb near the train tracks. And they've suddenly realised, blimey, we're probably going to have to move this thing because it might go off. Not that it's done that in the best part of about 80 years, but you never know with these things. Anyway, who else knows more? Who else is better to speak to than Simon Calder, travel guru at The Independent? Simon, great to have you back on the show. This is quite funny, isn't it? A bomb discovered at 4 a.m. by workers moving earth near the tracks in the Saint-Denis area. Tell us more.
Well, I'm afraid it's not at all amusing for 25,000 people who have just found that their trains have been cancelled. Eurostar has now said, yep, we're not going to run any more. But let me talk you through what happened. So exactly as you say, early hours of this morning in Saint-Denis, just a few miles north of Gare du Nord, the main hub for Eurostar, and actually the busiest railway station in continental Europe as well, they discovered this. They obviously had to stop the trains running in and out. There's no obvious diversion route, and it's been one of those awful events where the very first people, I've spoken to some of them who'd arrived at St Pancras, were told, sorry, your train's cancelled, hang around, you might get one later. And finally, about half an hour ago, they said no trains at all today. And it's actually Friday, the busiest day of the week for Eurostar. Almost all of their 32 trains between London and Paris are full, and that's because you've got the usual business travellers shuttling back and forth between London and Paris. But on top of that, crucially, it's the weekend, and that's when, on a Friday, an awful lot of people say, let's go over to the city of love for a weekend. Unfortunately, they're going to be stuck, and it's very difficult. I've been checking flights. They seem all to have sold out. My only advice, if you are desperate to get to Paris, then don't start in London. You can look at, for instance, flights from Birmingham, or indeed you could fly to somewhere like Lyon, from where they have direct trains from the airport to Paris. But just miserable times. And of course, loads of people got hotel booked in Paris. They might not be able to get the money back for that. It's a real mess, Alex.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I mean, I've done every single route across the channel possible in my 3 years living in Belgium, so I kind of feel the pain of people when they turn up at the Eurostar station and go, oh, blimey, this is not so easy as waiting for a later train or jumping in the car, although that might be possible with the channel. But yeah, what is going to be done about this? Is there any projection of how long it's going to take to move this device and or detonate it or whatever they have to do so things can get back to normal? Oh, do you know what? We've lost him. Hopefully he hasn't been too close to that bomb. Let's hope Simon Calder's OK. Right, let's take some calls in the meantime and speak to Laura Jane, who's in Hampshire. Hi, Laura.
I'm hopping mad.
Tell me why.
always in reform. You know, there's something about boys when they just get their feeling of power. They just have to mess it up. And we cannot afford to have them mess this one up. We really can't. I mean, I know that what's going to happen, as Baroness Short sensibly said, the press are going to have a field day. They're going to wind them both up. They're going to get them, you know, everybody. And the Labour Party, blah, blah, blah. It's all going to go. And this is so stupid. Yeah. I'm sure Rupert Lowe has ambitions to be Prime Minister. But to be frank, even if he down the line were he to do so, he is not our man to get into number 10. Nigel Farage, whether he's messianic or not, is the man to get us in there.
Yeah, I mean, listen, look, Laura Jane, rather, I'm in a privileged position of knowing both men very well, extremely well. Sometimes I think I know Nigel Farage better than he knows himself as a woman who's by his side for so long.
Lucky. I was at school with Rupert Lowe's wife, but that's neither here nor there.
We've all got our connections, don't we? We're only one person away from one of them.
Boy, am I going to be writing a stiff note to his wife, but anyway.
But what you say, you know, when you look at this is an age-old tactic, I think, that all political parties and the press like to play with each other. And you're right, people shouldn't give in to this. This whole idea that there are rifts and divisions and then things end up in print. And because men are quite prideful, that's right. Men are very prideful. It's very difficult for them to sort of go, oh, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, let's sit down and break bread and sort this out. Unfortunately, that sort of sense of male pride can often get in the way of things. But what Claire Fox was saying is, you know, voters are so fed up of this. The power struggles, the factions, the fighting, the fallouts, you know, cats, rats in a sack, whatever it is. And they just want to have constructive progress. They want stability.
We were supposed to be getting away from this with our backing of reform. That's the whole point, is reform this whole stupid old, you know, it's just the wrong way to go. And I hope that somehow Rupert behind the scenes can go, as you say, oops.
Laura Jane, what would you do? Would you sort of sit them both down and be like a school teacher and say, right, you apologise to you, you apologise to you?
I wouldn't even say that. I would say, look, you have no idea how important this is to core voters in this country. Just shut up and get on with the important thing of getting us into number 10 so we can change things in this country.
Laura Jane, I love that. And I think that should be some sort of little voice note that we can send out to people. Just shut up. I think that is absolutely brilliant. Kind of reminds me a bit of Julia Hartley-Brewer, if I'm honest with you. Love you, Julia. Right, thank you, Laura Jane. Great to have you on the programme. Now we can go back to Simon Calder, who's... well, Simon, what were you doing there? Were you going off to try and help them detonate that World War II bomb?
Well, I apologise for the loss of contact, Alex, as always. But look, you kindly asked me when are things going to get back to normal, and I do not know. It's concerning that Eurostar has not got a contingency plan in place. As you will know from knowing the network, they could be running a shuttle service in and out of Lille station in northern France, and hopefully from there maybe taking people in coaches to and from Paris. It's absolutely not ideal. The assumption is that things will be back to work on Saturday, which will be a great relief for people who book trains then. But unfortunately, all the people, 25,000 of them not travelling today, they go to the back of the queue. So people, if there are trains running, anybody who's booked a ticket on those operating trains takes precedence over the people who very sadly have had their travel plans torn up today.
Oh, Simon, thank you for keeping us updated. And, well, let's hope that they manage to sort out whatever's going on over there, because I can tell you what, nothing is ideal in Lille. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because there's so much more coming up on the show after the break. We're going to be focusing our attention to that European Leaders Summit, where Ursula von der Leyen has been saying it's okay. European countries can borrow, they can invest in defence, something I don't think was on the plan sheet for them until President Trump called them out somewhat. And meanwhile, Zelensky is off to Saudi Arabia on Monday to chat with the Crown Prince there, and then the negotiators between Ukraine and America going to stay there in Riyadh and have a little conflab about this deal. supposedly, that's going to get America access to Ukrainian rare earth minerals and in return potentially provide some protection against Russia. We'll be speaking to Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OBE, former British Army colonel, about what he thinks about the latest developments when it comes to Ukraine. That's after this. Hello, welcome back to the show. Right, let's focus our attentions on all the latest ramifications of conversations about Ukraine with Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, OB, former British Army Colonel. Hamish, great to have you on the programme. It's almost like following the plot line of EastEnders, but I think one thing can be said as true, which is Trump's come into the White House and all of a sudden the game has changed. The same old status quo where Ukraine was being armed just enough, which was turning this into a war of attrition. The sort of weak-willed feebleness of Europe to really do what matters and slam those sanctions in place or give enough tanks or long-range missiles. Well, it seems to me that Trump said, OK, you're not doing your part, so we're not going to do ours either. And it's forced European leaders to hold emergency summits and try and find consensus. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much consensus floating around even still. What are your thoughts on the latest developments?
Well, hi, good morning, Alex. Thanks for having me on. As the great military philosopher Clausewitz said, clout, don't dribble. And that is really what you're describing there. You know, hitherto, Europe has done just enough. The US have done just enough. And we've had this sort of status quo for 3 years. So, sure, Trump is mixing things up and changing things. But I would say, you know, all the pressure seems to be on Kyiv and Zelensky and not on Putin. The holding of US intelligence and surveillance assets is allowing the beleaguered Russian army to regroup and pretty much unfettered because Ukraine can no longer use the targeting information of its missiles. Conversely, of course, as we've seen overnight, Russia is doing massive amounts of drones and missiles attack on the energy infrastructure. Again, Ukraine is hindered because it's lost those American surveillance assets. We understand the Times is reporting today that Trump is very happy that Zelensky is now more to his way, Trump's way of thinking. So at the end of the day, Trump holds all the cards here. But it just seems strange that he seems to be giving the advantage to Putin rather than Zelensky. But we all hope there'll be a ceasefire as soon as possible. and it's getting closer with Trump in whatever guise that will be than it has in the last 3 years, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, actually, and I completely concur with what you're saying, that Putin is kind of out of the picture now. There's been a 90-minute phone conversation. We don't really know what was said. The pressure's all been piled on Ukraine, who are now having to defend like Billy-O. We do understand that this sort of arms pause from America is just that, a pause. But it has actually got Europe to potentially wake up. You've got Ursula von der Leyen there talking about borrowing, is it up to 600 billion, in order to fund greater defence. The difficulty is, of course, is Europe is in a big mess because they've got inflation anyway, because they've had to cut off Russian gas supplies. That's impacted on manufacture, which in turn has put a downward spiral into the economy, forcing them to borrow more to build up defence armaments, which again plays in to Putin's hands. With this, these conversations that are now going to take place in Riyadh in Saudi between America and Ukraine, do you think we're therefore nudging towards some sort of resolution?
Well, let's hope so. It is well timed that Europe took responsibility for its own defence. We in Europe, including the UK, have paid lip service to it since the end of the Cold War. So we are where we are, and we need to look at ourselves deeply in that. When it comes to what happens in Saudi again, it's the Ukrainians need a equal seat at this table. Now, only yesterday, Putin said he wouldn't allow NATO forces in Ukraine to be the ceasefire force, which has been planned. Now, in that respect, there is no other force that could do this. So, you know, one hopes that this again is just Putin playing Trump and playing Zelensky, and there is up for negotiation, because with no British and French peace enforcement force in Ukraine, there isn't going to be a ceasefire. But when people get down and talk in Riyadh in Saudi next week, let's hope they come up with some plans to do this, because, you know, as we've discussed, everybody wants peace as soon as possible. But at the moment, it's all to the advantage of Russia. They invaded, they've grabbed 17% of Ukraine. And I think what Trump perhaps doesn't fully understand is that in Europe, we cannot allow Russia to completely take Ukraine. We would have to get involved. And that's a problem for us. It's not a problem for Trump, the other side of the Atlantic. So, yeah, there's an awful lot happening at the moment. And Trump and Hesketh and Vance say one thing one day and another thing the next day. And confusion and ambiguity in warfare are really challenging aspects to deal with. So let's hope we get some clarity next week.
Yeah, I mean, I get the impression actually Trump does actually understand the measure of this. I've heard him talk about defending Ukraine's coastlines and whether or not Putin should have any access to those. Strategically vital for the West. If Putin gets to control the Black Sea, we're in a whole world of pain, as is most of the world, actually. But the thing I'm confused about is Europe in all of this, because now Europe is sort of talking about who's going to put boots on the ground and what they can do and spending more on defence, which would have been great if they did this right at the start of the invasion. But actually the mood music coming out of Europe then was, don't poke the Russian bear. Ooh, he's like a cornered rat. You agitate him too much, he's going to lash back out. Anything we do could be provocative. This might be World War III. We must build him a golden bridge. Now all of a sudden, when Trump has said, wake up and get real, and they're trying to do so, there doesn't seem to be this alarmism anymore over what that's going to mean if Russia is supposedly provoked. Surely what's happening now is what should have happened a long time ago.
Yeah, of course, you're absolutely right, Alex. It should have done. But we have very different governments now in Europe. The German government, who could really have done something substantial 3 years ago, you know, were not interested, and they were trying to wean themselves off all the Russian gas and other hydrocarbons, and they had a very different government that was, you know, was not so keen on you know, poking the Russian bear, as you said. Now that's very much changed with the new German government now. Even ourselves have a different government in place, and the shift from the left to the right, as it were, in Europe, stand fast the UK in this, is making a difference, and people are suddenly realising that actually a war in Ukraine could very much spill into a war across the whole of Europe. And people have now realised that Putin, the tyrant that he is, respects strength and exploits weakness. And it's taken us a hell of a long time to get to that position. So hindsight is wonderful, but it's not going to help now.
Right, no, exactly. It is a wonderful thing, isn't it? But we are where we are. How strong is Putin? Because this is one thing that I can't quite get the measure of, and I think it's what Europe hasn't really got the measure of either. Because it seems to me this is ground into a war of attrition. Russia have lost a huge number of troops. I don't think their economy is doing brilliantly, although they do seem to be making a lot more money from selling their fossil fuels on the global stage amidst this crisis of Europe have cut them off. But where this has sort of been grinding on and grinding on, they weren't able to take Kiev within 24 hours. They haven't been able to have great territory gains, considering Ukraine has been armed just enough. Would it be fair to say that actually Russia's pretty weakened and we shouldn't be too fearful?
Absolutely. However, when you're an autocratic tyrant like Putin, you don't have to worry about what the general population think. And in that case, you know, his position is strong. He's lost 1 million people injured and killed. His economy, apart from the military side of it, is decimated. But unfortunately, the only people in Russia who have any power are the oligarchs and those close to Putin. You know, everybody else is put down, you know, in a similar fashion that Hitler operated in the Second World War. So I think we in the West must understand that Putin, the way he runs things, and Russia is very different to ourselves. I mean, you just imagine what would happen in this country if inflation was at 23%, interest rates were plus of that, and we'd lost 1 million people fighting in another country. I mean, it's unbelievable, but we are where we are. The key thing is that, as suggested, we've got to show absolute strength to Putin, because that is the only thing that he really understands.
But that still doesn't seem to be what's going on. Despite Ursula von der Leyen saying we now need peace through might, echoing Ronald Reagan, they've had this summit yesterday and they've come out of that summit doing what usually happens with any summit that takes place amongst EU leaders, having agreed on absolutely naff all.
Well, again, you know, that is the challenge of a bureaucracy like the EU. There are so many votes at the table. Trying to get everybody to agree is really challenging, which is why I think hitherto we've relied on the US, that has had the firepower and the horsepower to really change things and shift the dial. And in this case, you know, it would appear if Trump gets his rare earth minerals that he wants, then he is prepared to flex that muscle. And if that's what has to be done to create peace in Ukraine, then so be it.
But do you think that actually does create a US backstop? Because when I first heard this, you had all the noise going on in the Western media going, this is terrible, reparations are being asked of the person who's being invaded, not the invader, so on and so forth. And I thought, OK, but the thing is, what you've got to understand is for Americans sitting the other side of the Atlantic, most of them couldn't even point to Ukraine on a map and wants to know what on earth its responsibility is in defending it. And I kind of thought to myself, this is a genius move. America's kind of looking at the whole geopolitical picture here, saying that there's an entire anti-Western axis. A lot of this is done through grey zone warfare, including economic warfare. They desperately need those rare earth minerals in order to compete on the world stage against China. They've also pursued a policy now of drill, baby, drill, which will actually scupper Putin's ability to keep his own gas and oil prices so high. And at the same time, they're saying, well, look, we're going to have actual interests in the form of assets in Ukrainian territory. So if Putin dips a toe into that land, that then becomes our business.
Well, that's a nice idea, but let's not forget in Kuwait, in the first Gulf War, where I was a young tank commander, there were lots of American workers in Kuwait, and Saddam Hussein invaded. But, you know, it is a similar situation in some respects. But what I would say is, you know, history has a real habit of repeating itself. And I know that the Americans don't want to get involved, but I'm sure their leaders in 1917 and also in 1941 thought exactly the same thing. So actually, if a war does break out in Europe, more than it is at the moment, the Americans will be inextricably involved. But any way that we can come to a peace, rare earth minerals or whatever, I think everybody will welcome the horrific damage that's been done to Ukraine, the horrific casualties on both sides. nobody can appreciate that. So whatever it takes, I think we've got to try and support it, and then look at ourselves in Europe and think why actually we're part of the reason it happened in the first place.
Oh yeah, we're very much the reason. That's not to condone Putin or get him off the hook. The man is I haven't got enough words to say about that man and what I think about him. Anyway, Hamish, thank you ever so much. Fantastic insights from you as per usual. Let's have a little voice note now from David.
We all should have listened to General George Patton at the end of the Second World War. He wanted to take on the Russians there and then. He says, why we got our armies in Europe, we males, because these are going to be the next big threat to Europe. How right he was.
How right he was, and how right Hamish was when he said about American involvement. But the thing is, America has got involved in this, haven't they? Trump's come into the White House and said, this ends now under my watch. He's involved himself a lot. One could actually accuse the Biden administration of just passively sitting there, sending blank checks, not really having any position on the matter. And at least now we see a little bit of movement, don't we? How this plays out is anyone's guess, but hopefully it will bring, to quote a phrase I'm hearing far too often now, a just and enduring peace. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be discussing ULEZ, and guess what? All of that nonsense that's been inflicted upon the outer boroughs of London has been killing the high streets. Who'd have thunk? That's after this.
Been rather beautiful to watch. The plethora of combinations have almost been poetic. Two-tier, no beer, free gear, not here, deaf ear, unclear, right-wing smear, no idea, Starmer. I mean, the list goes on. There's many, many more you could add to it. And some of this, of course, has been good old-fashioned mischief. Criticising the MP, after all, or the PM, after all, is a rite of passage. A bit of comedic wordplay is literally how it's meant to work.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Now, before we talk about ULEZ, I'm going to read some of your messages because loads are pouring in and loads of them are absolutely brilliant. So Alex in Devon, great name, can I just say, says, morning, Alex. Everyone is suffering Russophrenia, a condition where the sufferer believes Russia is both about to collapse and also about to take control of the world. Then he says, bet you won't read that out. No, I thought that was so brilliant, and I agree totally. It is that way. Oh, don't prod Putin. He goes tonto. Well, we better arm ourselves against Putin. Well, Ukraine's really weak. They couldn't beat you. Russia's really weak. They couldn't beat Ukraine, could they? Oh, blimey, Russia's making loads of gains. It's madness. So yeah, Russophrenia. I like that. Great word. I'm going to nick it. Aren't we back in the age of empires? Putin has agreed, perhaps forced Trump, to allow Russia to take Europe. In exchange, America can have Canada, Greenland, probably South America. America will withdraw from South Korea and the North will unite and probably take Japan. China will get Taiwan. I mean, it's an interesting thought that everyone's becoming these uber continents and everyone's going to be nicking each other's land. And there's definitely talk about Greenland and a joke about making Canada another state of America. And of course, we do know that China does want Taiwan. That's just geopolitics, though. That is the way it always is in the world. We just seem to talk about it a lot more these days when perhaps we didn't before. Now, Alex, why can't Rupert Lowe air his differences with Nigel in private instead of giving ammunition to the likes of Fiona Bruce to rub her hands with glee and put Richard Tice on the spot on Question Time last night? Can't everyone just have conversations behind closed doors when they've got a problem with someone else? Makes life a lot easier. Alex, in 2017, Trump warned EU leaders that if they didn't increase their defence spending, the US would wash their hands of defending Europe. So here we are, 8 years later, and those clowns in Brussels are holding an emergency meeting. Yup, that's exactly it. I always say that the one thing one should do is listen to what Trump says, because he doesn't talk in riddles. He's very plain speaking. And he says, I'm going to do that. And very often he does it. And it works. He said, he threatened everyone with tariffs, so they did what he wanted to, and now they've done what he's wanted. There, he's saying, OK, we won't put tariffs on. Just listen to the man. He does hold all the cards. He is the leader of the free world. Hi, Alex. I wouldn't worry too much about the in-house fighting in reform. If you remember Margaret Thatcher's government, I was too young, but I do love her. She used to encourage arguing to make sure that the right decisions were made. That's a very positive outlook. This is a brilliant message. This is absolutely gold dust. Hi, Alex. Do Eurostar not have a rail replacement ferry? That's good. I really like that. That's from Craig. Absolutely excellent. And just a final one before we go on to speak to Howard Cox about ULEZ guidelines on sentencing. Basically, this is an expression of critical race theory in our legal system, where the indigenous population is, according to this dodgy philosophy, the privileged oppressors. I couldn't agree more. Right, now, talking about privileged oppressors, Sadiq Khan's ULEZ scheme has hurt high streets. Retail spending has plummeted as shoppers have been forced to tighten their belts in response to the London Mayor's levy. Let's speak now to Howard Cox, founder of Fair Fuel UK. Hi, Howard. How are you doing?
I'm all right, Alex. Nice to speak to you again.
Lovely to have you on the programme. Now, who would have thought that if you were going to make it more difficult for people to drive about the place in the outskirts of London, that people would stop driving about the place in the outskirts of London and therefore stop going shopping?
Oh, what a surprise. Yes. I mean, yeah, but it's impacting on all business. It's not just shops, because I produced about a year and a half before ULEZ expansion was introduced. I got the CEBR, the Centre for Economic and Business Research, producing the economic analysis. They showed that ULEZ would actually destroy London's GDP by £1 billion each year. But that was completely ignored, and lo and behold, what's come to fruition today is that, the economy is declining in London. And guess who's in charge of it?
Guess who's in charge of it? Would that be one other than Sadiq Khan? The problem is, of course, what we're learning is apparently 8 out of London's 33 local authority areas saw spending in high street shops increase. I bet we can guess where those areas are. Meanwhile, retail spending in London's 20 outer boroughs fell by 3.4%. And the worst hit was Barking and Dagenham, where high street spending plummeted by 13.25%. This is essentially, as most green policies do, it disproportionately impacts upon people with less money.
Absolutely right. And one of the biggest influences of people not going there is the parking charges are rocketing. And you're finding that diesel, particularly fossil fuelled vehicles, are being penalised more than electric vehicles. And no one can afford an electric vehicle. And my point about Sadiq Khan is that he hasn't got a clue, and he's regarding any road user strategy. And he's long-term policy is to get us off and ruin our freedom to drive, Alex. And I'm going to carry on fighting this. I'm an independent, as you know now, and what I'm trying to do is fight on behalf of the motorists. And I'm hoping that Labour, the Tories, and Reform will get behind the campaign which I've been running for 15 years to actually support motorists. And it's not just London; other cities across the country are being impacted by various things like LTNs, ULEZs, congestion charges, parking charges, you name it, anything to destroy our freedom to drive.
Now, what Sir Sadiq would say is data shows that actually air quality has improved. Levels of harmful emissions have declined after the ULEZ expansion. What do you have to say to that? Is that true, or is he massaging the figures?
Oh, but he's a master manipulator of figures. Remember the 4,000 deaths we had? He was using that all of the time when only one person allegedly on a death certificate actually died because of poor air quality. He also tried to get the Imperial College to actually prove that ULEZ is a good for the air quality, and they couldn't because it isn't good for the air quality. The point is he's measuring NOx. NOx is a volatile gas that if you measure it at the wrong time of the day when there's lots of traffic or the weather's bad or there's a fog or anything like that, you cannot compare over a time period accurate figures regarding NOx. And we all know that he's doing this, as I say, to get rid of the motorists. And that, yes, there probably has been a reduction, but for the last 10 years, even without congestion charges and ULEZ charges, air quality has been improving anyway, because of good, clean fuel technology from our manufacturers.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. And what do you have to say about the vandals who have styled themselves as Blade Runners, using power tools to cut down newly installed ULEZ enforcement cameras? Is that working?
Well, I think you'll find that there's, I don't know how many fines that they haven't been able to collect. I'm not going to condone them to doing that sort of thing. They shouldn't be doing this. I tend to do things by objective economic analysis and, campaigning in Westminster. But the frustration for these Blade Runners is, I'm afraid it's going to continue. I'm afraid until we get something common sense and we get rid of this totally and utterly useless London mayor, we're going to have the same problem.
Now, I can't let you go without asking this question. You, of course, were Reform UK's candidates for London Mayor. You have subsequently left the party. What do you make of this sort of, what's being I don't know if it's being blown up out of proportion, but this seeming spat between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage?
Yeah, it's sad, actually, and I do tend to think that it should be being aired behind closed doors. I mean, Rupert has said the same things. I left on one issue because I support Reform UK completely, and they're still the best option for this country. And I think you and I would agree on that one. I left on one principle because I was threatened with expulsion because I supported Tommy Robinson and the way he's being treated in prison. It's nothing to do with you like him or not. And Rupert Lowe said the same thing, exactly what I've said. And he and I are on the same proverbial hymn sheet. And all Nigel's got to do, who I've got huge respect for, is to say, look, that man's being treated terribly. Let's get this sorted out. Free him now, because it's a civil charge. You know that, Alex. It's not fair. This is completely wrong.
Howard, thank you ever so much. Howard Cox, ladies and gentlemen. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but don't go anywhere because my former TV husband, Kev, is joining me after this.
I spoke with His Majesty the King to request the dissolution of Parliament, and we will have a general election on the 4th of July.
I have just returned from Buckingham Palace to form the next government of this great nation.
Take a look at what happened.
I immediately knew it was very serious, that we were under attack.
The time has come, and this surely is England's time.
Williams, who scores, and Spain lead. The shot from distance is in. It is Cole Palmer. Low ball in, or far ball, slides it in. An absolute killer of a goal.
I agree with the protest, but I don't think the violence was anywhere near necessary.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone, Nigel, would ever think that the violence was the answer at all.
אזרחי ישראל, אנחנו במלחמה.
I probably took a bullet to the head because of the things that they say about me.
If Donald Trump were president, Putin would be sitting in Kyiv right now.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats.
Liberal left couldn't understand that this man could be anything other than the great newsreader, a man of integrity.
Is it possible in any way, shape or form that Keir Starmer didn't know about these facts about the suspect in Southport?
I find it extraordinary that he wouldn't know. It seems that the public has not been told the truth.
No, there's nothing like an American election, I have to say. North Dakota has gone red, South Dakota's red, Texas is red.
Many people have told me that God spared my life for a reason.
Bloomberg UK reporting Ukraine has made the first long-range missile strike inside of Russia. These are the missiles that Biden has approved for the use by Ukraine.
Hello, welcome back to the show. Alex Phillips here with you until 1 o'clock. Now, without further ado, shall we roll out the red carpet for the greatest misanthropist of them all, Mr. Kevin O'Sullivan, my former television husband, to jog us through what's been going on in the news. Because, Kevin, everyone kind of misses that sort of, what were we? We were like a sort of Richard and Judy on Downers or something. Angry Richard and Judy back in the day.
I was called as Richard and Judy without the money.
Oh, that's very true, actually, yeah. Right, now, let's first of all start off talking about what is going on in reform. Is this a genuine spat? Is this one of those Westminster bubble things where everyone's going, oh, look, they're all falling out with each other? You know, is Rupert Lowe right? Is Nigel Farage right? Should we care? What are your thoughts, Kev?
Well, first of all, I'm really sorry to see this going on because, you know, I studiously don't go out of my way to support parties, but I've got a lot of time for reform. Some of the members of reform are my good friends. So I thought that they were on the path to glory. I thought that the project, or I think the project's very exciting. But this kind of infighting isn't going to do the party any good at all. I'm not quite sure what Rupert Lowe is up to, but to sit down with the Daily Mail and say that the leader, Nigel Farage, has got a messiah complex and that the trouble with reform is they're just a protest group. I mean, that is to literally not literally, stop saying literally, Kevin, that is to take the rug from underneath.
Figuratively.
Yeah, figuratively. That is sad. And I think they've got a problem here. I mean, if you remember, of course you remember, back in November, Ben Habib quit, also citing that he thought Nigel Farage had too much power. But between then and now, Nigel has actually taken steps to make it look as if he doesn't have so much power. He's relinquished some of his total control. But here we are now, and suddenly Rupert Lowe is sort of suggesting that perhaps he could take over as leader, perhaps he could be a future prime minister. And I suspect, I mean, I like Rupert, but I suspect he's been somewhat corrupted by that endorsement by Elon Musk on X, on Twitter, when Elon Musk tweeted, Farage doesn't have what it takes, I like Rupert Lowe.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I always wonder who's sort of pulling strings behind the scenes here and feeding lines to various people and giving people certain ideas. There's usually some other dark arts involved in when you see this stuff happen. Let's have a listen to what Nigel Farage said to Harry Cole yesterday.
We are not a protest party in any way at all. That is utterly wrong. Utterly, completely wrong. We are an entirely positive party. Come to any reform event and the positivity, the energy, and perhaps you should come to one or two.
I've been. I came to your one in Birmingham. There were fireworks.
Well, look, do you know what? if I've got a following out there, that's a good thing. If I hadn't, we wouldn't have won any seats in Parliament at all on the 4th of July.
Including Great Yarmouth, I presume you put in that.
Wouldn't have been a cat's chance in hell, would there? Come on, be honest about it.
Rupert Lowe, will he still be a Reform MP by the next election? What do you reckon?
Well, I hope so, but he seems to be taking a tone that says he might not accept us, but there you are.
I mean, this is the thing. Is there anything wrong with being a big, powerful, strong leader in politics? When you think back to a lot of our greatest prime ministers, they have been conviction leaders. They have been, rather than people who like to compromise, like Theresa May used to love trying to do. They have been people saying it's my way or the highway, and surely that's kind of needed.
Well, yes, I agree. I mean, you know, oddly, political parties, they're like newspapers. Newspapers should never be democracies. They are run by the editor. The editor makes the decisions, and political parties should be the same, that the leader makes the decisions and the others follow. Now, what I would advise Nigel Farage, if he's looking for advice from me, seriously.
Yeah, he is. He thinks you're like, you know, some sort of Rasputin guru.
Yes, exactly. Emphasis on the Rasputin. No, it's be yourself. Follow your instincts. The reason Reform are where they are now, the reason they have made these incredible strides, and the reason they still have potentially a fantastic future is him and his instincts. Don't be corrupted by stupid advisors telling you, oh, don't do this and don't do this. All Nigel Farage has ever done, and I think you know this, Alex, is followed his own heart and followed his own instincts and then articulated them brilliantly. Carry on like that and this party will be okay. But this infighting is not good. They have to sort the Rupert Lowe problem out, and sharpish.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a great, I adore Rupert. I know him very well. He's absolutely a brilliant man, an honourable man. I do think they'll be able to sort it out, quite frankly. But you never know, do you? Let's speak now to Andrew in Hertfordshire, who wants to tell us his thoughts on this. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, good morning, both of you. Look, they have to be on the news at 12 o'clock, sitting down together, solving this, or they're finished. This sort of infighting kills it stone dead. If you're going to be a new party, you have to be 100% on message. And I learned that from Ranulph Fiennes, who said, when you go on a trek, anyone that's not a team member, get rid of them. So these two have to grow up immediately, because they're finished. Reform's done. Because these things kill parties stone dead. And they're in a bad place.
Well, there you go. I mean, Andrew there basically saying that anyone who doesn't get on board needs to become husky meat. But what do you think about that, Kev? I mean, this is sort of like, it is one of those things. You do wonder, actually, whether these conversations are things that go on inside the Westminster bubble and, you know, all these sort of spats and all the rest of it. And if people out there are just like, oh, God's sakes, they don't actually keep up with it or they don't care. How dangerous do you think this is for the party?
Well, I think Andrew made a good point there. That's a good analogy, the Ranulph Fiennes story. You know, you need the team has to be as one, has to be unified. And these people who keep sort of going off track, like Ben Habib and now Rupert Lowe, are not doing Nigel Farage or Reform any favours. As I just said, I just think Nigel Farage should know this, that people love him. If he follows his own instincts and says what he thinks, don't let any stupid little spad tell you, don't say that, oh no, just follow your instincts, Nigel.
Do you get the impression, actually, that's interesting you say that, this sort of one thing that people have, you know, sort of saying to me, and one thing that Rupert Lowe has become very popular for doing is saying it like it is. In many respects, Rupert Lowe has almost taken Nigel's position as being the vanguard of plain speaking and that sort of political courage, whereas Nigel seems to be, I don't know, he's sort of like, he's playing it very safe, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I was pretty shocked when suddenly Nigel Farage said, oh, we might sort of endorse Shamima Begum coming back to the country. And I thought to myself, like a lot of Reform supporters, I thought, That's not very reform. Are they trying to be mainstream? Don't try to be mainstream. Don't try to be like the Tories. And for God's sake, don't try to be like Labour. Be like Reform. Reform are where they are because they've done it their way, and they should continue doing it their way. And somehow or other, Nigel has to knock heads together, talk to Rupert Lowe, and bring everyone back into line. I would suggest, if possible, a joint appearance, perhaps with a few of them, maybe Richard Tice as well, and Rupert and Nigel very soon in the media, projecting a unified image, and that would put this problem behind them. But he does need to address this. This is a problem right now.
Yeah, Kev, I reckon you'd make a really good Malcolm Tucker stalking around Reform HQ, attacking people, swearing at them. Yeah, I think you'd be good at that. I think there's a sort of moonlighting opportunity for you there. Now, talking about moonlighting, Just Stop Oil protesters, if they even have jobs, I don't know if they do. Well, a lot of them don't now because they're in prison. But apparently some of them have now got their sentences cut after appeal, including the co-founder Roger Hallam. He's had his sentence reduced by a year after a High Court appeal. He was jailed for 5 years last July over a plot to disrupt N25 traffic, and now it's been reduced to 4 years on appeal. I mean, it's a shame they didn't increase it, frankly speaking. But
exactly.
I mean, I actually think it's a shame he didn't fall off the gantry, but that's another idea altogether. But I mean, this is the thing. The problem is, right, if we're saying the government's too strong on putting people in prison because of social media posts and the riots and this, that and the other, and they need to sort of turf people out of prison to make spaces, they cause a lot of disruption, but they are essentially just a load of sort of Hessian sack-wearing nutters, aren't they? They're not exactly murderers and rapists.
Well, they're a waste of space, but I think the message sent to them was important. You cannot go around disrupting everybody's lives just because you think we're all going to die tomorrow because we use petrol in our cars. You're fanatics, you're a waste of space, and you're incredibly annoying and disruptive. You know what I'm talking about. People didn't get to hospital because of them. People died because of them. People couldn't get to work. Mothers couldn't get their kids to school. We can't have that. So they got that message sent to them. What we're talking about here, Alex, is a higher problem. Of course, they've had their sentences reduced. Of course, their appeals have been successful because they're left wing and so are the bloody judges. Our problem here, in every single case, we see it time and time again now. Look at these tribunal judges. They're Guardian readers. They're left-wing, and we've got to do something about it. We have to bring these judges back into line. Every single time a left-winger appeals or appears in court, they're going to get lenient treatment. There will be two-tier justice there because our judges are now institutionally left-wing, and what we need is a system whereby the people can judge the judges. I say elect them, like in America. So if they start acting like this, going lenient on Just Stop Oil, we can get them out of their jobs.
It's a great idea. I love it. Now, I want to speak to you a bit more about the two-tier sentencing that's come out. But before I do, I just want you to spare a thought for some of these poor Just Stop Oil people who have been banged up, because I wonder how they're doing in prison. Shall we read out some of their names and speculate on how they're finding it inside the cell?
Double-barreled names.
Oh, we've got Lucia Whitaker de Abreu, Cressida Gethin, Dr. Larch Maxey, and Gay Delap. How do you reckon they're getting on?
Very badly, I hope. Very badly. Actually, what's funny about these eco-protesters, as soon as they do get sent to jail, all the protests stop. Because they're middle class and they're terrified of jail. So I say lock them up. I say give them life.
Oh, I bet they're there in the sort of, in the prison teaching knitting and Tai Chi and cooking up bowls of lentil soup in the prison kitchens. Yeah, there you are. Right, now, let's talk about this. I mean, I couldn't believe it when I saw this pop up on X, this whole softer sentencing for minorities. I was like, is this some sort of joke? That can't really have happened. Oh, but it did. Sentencing guidelines actually have now instructed judges that if people come from ethnic minority backgrounds, they should get softer sentences. Well, thankfully, the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, said not under my watch, and I'm going to get rid of you as a Quanga if you don't reverse these guidelines. Good on her. But it turns out these guidelines were drawn up on the back of recommendations by none other than chief wokist and race baiter David Lammy. Your thoughts on that, Kev?
Well, I fear and I suspect that this is an underhand Labour project. As you say, David Lammy's hands are all over it. And Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, is making the right noises. But she's indulging in the Labour government's favourite activity, performative powerlessness. She's the Justice Secretary. She could stop this, but she's sort of saying, well, I can't really, but I have written to register my displeasure and I might change the law. This comes into action, this new guidance, whereby ethnic minorities, Muslims, trans people will get more lenient treatment than the rest of us in April. She hasn't got time to do anything about it. I suspect she's just making the right noises, and this is what Labour wants. We all know we've had two-tier justice now for ever since they came in, and probably before as well. It's getting worse, and now they have enshrined it in print. It is now official Labour policy. So I distrust Shabana Mahmood. She's, as I say, she sounds like she's saying the right things, but this comes into action in April, and I bet you nothing is done about it.
Only time will tell, Kev. It's so good catching up with you, speaking absolute sense in your inimitable fashion. The wonderful Kevin O'Sullivan, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Kev. Right, let's read some of your messages before we go to break. The Rupert Lowe thing is a storm in a teacup. This is Sue in West Sussex. It's another 4 years until the next general election. Remember, a week is a long time in politics. I have no worries at all in the long term because reform are our only hope. There you go, Sue resolutely saying, I'm not going to be caught up in all of this nonsense. The press are basically just making hay, nothing to see here. However, a different Sue says it seems to me Rupert Lowe is a Trojan of the Tories, there to sabotage reform, something reform needs to be aware of. I don't think he's necessarily a Trojan of the Tories, but I'm sure the Tories are enjoying every single minute of this. Caroline says Thatcher was kind of messianic and the right voter loved her. It was her own colleagues who stabbed her in the back. Rupert needs to be careful. Reform must start providing ideas and answers to policy questions in the next 12 to 15 months. But then, as other Sue said, Sue number one said, but we're a long time away from a general election, aren't we? And let's change the tune here and talk a little bit more about geopolitics, because John in Norwich has messaged to say, consider a possible scenario. Donald Trump implements his drill baby drill policy to achieve energy dominance, driving oil prices down to $20 a barrel. Wouldn't that be nice? Russia's economy, heavily reliant on oil exports, faces catastrophic consequences at such a low price point. Indeed they do. You've been doing your homework. With its revenue streams crippled, Russia's economy is brought to its knees, potentially bankrupting the nation and rendering it unable to sustain costly military conflicts. This mirrors the strategy Ronald Reagan used to weaken the Soviet Union, leveraging low oil prices to undermine its economic stability. With the introduction of the Star Wars project, Russia could not compete. John, I just want to say this. Best message I've read in a long time. You have got this bang on. That, I am certain, is America's policy. Rebelize Russia through bringing back fossil fuels, drill baby drill, weaken the only leg they've got to stand on, force everybody else to spend heavily on defence and make Putin look like the pipsqueak that he is. And of course, to do all of those things, including putting widgets in space, they're gonna need those rare earths. Rare earths. He loves the rare earths, does Donald. Rare earths. Right, brilliant. I really did love that message. Keep your thoughts coming in, because after the break, more of that, please. 03444991000 is the number if you'd like to send me a WhatsApp message for me to read out, or indeed leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You can also use that number to give me a call directly in the studio. 03444991000. Your standard network rate applies. You can message me 87222, but you have to write the word talk before your text, otherwise it gets lost somewhere in the ether. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm back with you after this.
idea that the business of business should be business, and in with we all have a responsibility to do all this ethical mumbo jumbo. But of course, the people who actually jump on this stuff are mad, far left, zealot ideologues, and this is the only way they've ever found, this ESG crap, to get their ideas that never actually work in the real world into the private sector. It's why so much of the time you see mad lefties working in universities and working in other public sector organisations, their ideas don't and can't survive and normally in contact with the real world.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. It is time for your calls, your messages, your time to take control of this show and let me know what you think. Let's speak to Paul, who's in Newport. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Alex. How you doing?
Yeah, all right. Not bad, my love. Not bad at all. How are you doing?
I'm okay, thank you. I'm okay.
Good.
Right, Reform. The reason Nigel and Reform are where they are is because they were, Nigel predominantly, he was saying exactly what the hard-working, tax-paying people, the silent majority as they're known, he was saying what they were thinking. He built this thing and said, I've had enough of boats. I've had enough of MPs like Matt Hancock bunging a PPE deal to his pub landlord and, you know, the woke community riding roughshod, the less than 1% dictating everything for the other 99%. So what Nigel was, the reason Nigel is where he is because he said the right things. And everyone said, now there's the man who's saying what I'm thinking.
Right.
So and when you look at, you were talking about the risk to Nigel, okay? There are two things in my opinion. The risk to Nigel is, if he ever got in power, well, I think he will do better. If he gets in power and doesn't deliver, goodness knows what the country will be like. Because we'd all vote for him to do the things that we all moan about, the holes in the roads, all sorts of stuff. If he ever did it and then didn't achieve, there would be bloody civil war.
And blimey, point the second, Paul. You said two risks.
No. The second point I was going to make was, if I could give Nigel any advice whatsoever, I say, Nigel, spend at least an hour a day listening to talk radio. Because the people on talk radio are the very people who are voting for you. Right?
Now, I just want to pick up on something. If he were listening to this, one thing I noticed when you were first speaking is you said where Reform have got to is because Nigel said the things that people wanted to hear. He would say, Are you talking in the past tense, though? Because some of the criticism that's been levelled against him recently is that he might have gone a bit soft.
Well, it's not soft. Well, he needs to focus on. I run a business here, okay, and all we can do every year we pick the 6 things. There's probably 60 things, but we pick the top 6 and we focus on the top 6 and we get them done.
Right.
Okay. And if you do that, so if you focus on boats, whatever it is, focus on boats, roads, schools, you know, all this sort of stuff, and focus on it and get them done. If Nigel goes wrong, where Nigel will go wrong, if he starts talking about Shamima Begum, well, that's not even on anyone's radar. That's yesterday. Don't talk about that. Why would you talk about Shamima Begum when there's other things far, far more sort of a bigger blob on the radar?
I actually don't know where that comment came from. I reckon he's probably asked about her. I don't think he woke up in the morning and thought to himself, oh, yeah, I want to talk about Shamima today. I bet a pesky journalist might ask him the question, but I don't know its provenance. Paul, I've got to move on, but thank you so much for your insights and your opinions on this one. Let's speak to Gareth, who's in Derbyshire. Hi, Gareth.
Good morning, nice to speak to you. It's a lovely day.
Glad it is where you are. Is it a lovely day everywhere in the country? That's what I want to know. I hope it is.
Nice. It's always nice in Derbyshire. Now,
and it is.
I'm afraid a lot of your listeners won't like what I'm going to say, but there's only going to be one opposition to Labour at the next election. It'll be the Conservative Party. Reform, you can start to see chinks in their armour. You know, they're just a protest party, really, and you know they're actually a one-man band.
But hold on, have you got selective dementia when it comes to chinks in armour and infighting? Because didn't we live through basically, I don't know, at least 15 years of that? We had that 1 year where we changed Prime Minister every 5 seconds. We had the faction fighting over Brexit. I mean, the Conservative Party spent more time fighting than actually doing anything.
Conservatives have learnt the lesson. Kemi Badenoch is a good person. I just think the Reform are not going to be able to offer what you need to win a general election. The only thing they're going to do, and voters need to know this, is, for instance, in these council elections that are coming up in May, the ones that haven't been cancelled by Labour, then if Reform take the votes off Conservatives, it's going to let Labour in, which is going to be a disaster.
Hold on a minute. I just want to correct something there. The elections weren't necessarily cancelled by Labour. I mean, look, what happened here is Labour suddenly went, we're going to invent this brand new policy about devolution and restructure the way that local authorities work, which wasn't in their manifesto. They just pulled it out of their backsides just like that. And what Angela Rayner said to local authorities is, do you want to postpone your elections in order to put in place these changes? And do you know who all said, oh, yes, please. Oh, my God, we're going to cancel our elections? The Conservative-led authorities, because they were scared of losing their seats to Reform. So, frankly, I think the two legacy parties colluded to cancel these elections.
Well, anyway, the thing is, Nigel Farage is probably doing a good job, but he's a one-man band. Rupert Lowe ought to concentrate on Southampton Football Club because they don't look in a very good position at the moment.
No, I don't. I know nothing about football, Gareth. I ain't going to be led down that path because I'll get myself into a whole world of hot water. But what I will ask before I let you go is, look, the Conservatives in many respects in voters' minds are somewhat discredited. They spent ages fighting and they had 3 terms in power and didn't really deliver the goods. So people are willing to give, if they're on the right of politics, Reform a chance. And the polling is reflecting that. But like you said, at present, Reform has just 5 MPs. After the next general election, that could substantially change. But it could be a lot of new faces who don't know how the system works. Is that going to be a good thing for democracy? Do we need that revitalisation of people who aren't career politicians? Or do you think, actually, the unity of the fresh face, fresh leadership, fresh sort of injection of a direction and an ideology for once, rather than the broad church thesis of the Conservative Party, mixed with the experience of some of the proper, sensible people in the Conservative Party, could actually be the perfect cocktail to govern this country?
I think the thing is the Conservatives have had to kick up the proverbial. They understand they made mistakes and they've got to come back as a sensible, broad-reach party that actually puts up a challenge for an election so they can win it. You can't win the general election by just appealing to, I love talk radio, I listen to it most days, but you can't win a general election by just appealing to talk radio listeners. You've got to have a broad approach. If Labour carry on in charge of this country, places like Derbyshire, they're going to ruin our countryside for a start. They're talking about building new towns all over the place that are not needed. It's just a total ridiculous joke. Labour is a total disaster, and that's the thing that any sensible Conservatives need to think. Do we want to have the United Kingdom being run by people like Keir Starmer and his cronies?
Or do we want the United Kingdom run by people who aren't running it at all, which is what we seem to have over the last Conservative 5,000 Prime Ministers? Do you know what? I just despair at politics in this country in total. It's just, I think most people feel like that. They're just like, oh, goodness, here we go again. But Gareth, it's been a gorgeous speaking to you, my love. I'm glad the weather is wonderful up in beautiful Derbyshire. So it's a wonderful county. And thank you so much for your input. And it's interesting there, people, all they want to see is common sense, right-wingery, putting Britain first, defending our borders, injecting some momentum back into our economy by getting rid of the net zero claptrap, also getting rid of all of the woke claptrap where men with beards can be women and all this nonsense that is just polluting the mindset of this nation. It's very clear what voters want, not just in Britain. They asked for it in America, in Italy, in France, in every single country in the West, in Canada. Bye-bye, Justin. Your day's up, isn't it? Everywhere you look in the West, the populations are going, it's been a disaster. We've been sleptwalked to the edge of the cliff by global elites who seem to be doing the opposite of what we've wanted to happen, and we've had enough. That is what needs to change across the West. It started with Brexit, I would argue, then Trump 2.0, really delivering the bacon back at home. What is going to happen in the United Kingdom? We're not going to find out for another 4 years, but it's going to be a fun journey getting there, isn't it? Right, now I'm going to take a short break. When I come back, we're catching up with Mike Neville, former Met Police Detective Inspector, about the crossbow rapist killer who was obsessed with Andrew Tate. That's after this. know what? Every cloud has a silver lining. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story to prove my points, because sometimes when you think life is really bad, you get unexpected Phillips, as in F-I-L-I-P, a little Philip, a boon, not a Phillips like me. I'm an expected Phillips, not an unexpected one. And I learned some very sad news last night. I learned that one of my utterly brilliant, exceptional producers, Abby, was leaving the channel. She's going to work somewhere else. And I thought, I don't really know how I'm going to cope with this. It's all going to fall apart because she's such a vital link in the chain. And she's wonderful. She's a gorgeous girl. You just walk in the morning and she's joy. She's absolutely just abundant with kindness and efficiency. And so when I learned that Abby was going to pastures new, I felt pretty upset. Turns out, because this is her last show, she's having a bit of a party out there, which means they've brought in some Prosecco and some cookies. Woohoo! So there you go. Every cloud has a silver lining. I wish more staff would quit on a regular basis. Now, let's cross over to Mike Neville and talk about a very different gear change here. Crossbow rapist killer. Now, this is the story of Kyle Clifford. He has, he was obsessed with Andrew Tate. He was watching influencer videos before raping his ex-girlfriend and murdering her. This was Louise Hunt. He was a former soldier. He tried to ban her from wearing makeup. He tried to change the way she dressed, refused to let her go out without him, didn't want her socialising with male friends. Meanwhile, he was dating at least 2 other women. It turns out as well that his brother is also in prison. But into this sort of toxic cocktail, you add a love of Andrew Tate, where he was sort of watching a lot of these videos of misogynist in chief and really taking delight in the content thereof. Let's speak now to Mike Neville, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector. Mike, Kyle Clifford sounds like a pretty horrific human, as does his older brother Bradley, who's serving a life sentence for murder, which suggests they've probably come from a background which has been conducive to turning men into monsters. How much then is watching content by people such as Andrew Tate fueling behaviour, or is it just symptomatic of a man who was already pretty much a beast?
I think he's just a thoroughly evil man who should be facing the hangman's noose rather than anything else. And let's hope he gets an absolutely massive sentence, if not in prison for life for the wickedness of his crimes. But in relation to the Andrew Tate video, I just think they're part of the deadly cocktail in the mix here, that the man can, he is a vile individual, obviously very controlling towards women in particular. And adding to the mix, he can obtain weapons like crossbows legally. He can watch these video nasties and fuel his hatred. The only problem we have, of course, we can control things like the purchase of crossbows and the like, but these videos appear from all over the world. You know, the police weren't really set up to deal with a world where you could watch something made in Tokyo, Buenos Aires or New South Wales, because we have no control over those things. And so it really is a deadly mix when you get somebody evil and then they watch these sort of things.
I mean, but what is the answer to all of this? I mean, as a former Met Police detective, I mean, have you seen this as a very new phenomenon that is pushing people towards violence and pushing people towards abuse? And you know, what is the answer? There's going to be a lot of people saying, well, this is free speech. You can't start censoring the internet because, well, that isn't how we should live as a society.
Well, I meant practically it would be almost impossible anyway if people want to get hold of the most disgusting child pornography or vile speeches on the internet. They're always available. And what we've got to do, of course, is to try and stop people being evil. But Jack the Ripper had no video nasties to watch. Somebody probably blamed him reading a book or something about these things. So there are always going to be evil men, and men are 95% of violent criminals, if not more. Men do very good things defending their country, but when it goes wrong, when they use that violence within them for all the wrong reasons, this is what we end up with. And I really don't know what the police can do with individuals like this. You know, they would have known his brother had a conviction for murder, but to try and say, oh, he's likely to do that as well, or they'll be guilty of labelling him or something like that. So how do you manage really violent, evil men who seemingly, if you look at sort of the Peter Sutcliffe, who are good by day and then evil by night. They're the hardest people to manage, and I can't see that controlling the internet would do that. There's lots of men who watch these Andrew Tate videos, I've never watched them myself, who don't do these things. But it's the trigger for somebody who's just got evil in their mind already.
Yeah, that's the thing, isn't it? Psychopaths, monsters, abusers, misogynists, they're always going to exist. Like you said, there's a rich history of all sorts of nasty people with murderous intent throughout human history in every continent on Earth. And like you said, I kind of think when people are sort of reaching towards these videos, it's because it's filling that gap, it's tickling that fancy that already exists inside somebody. Could it be used as a way, though, and I say this tentatively, of if you see someone is, you know, perhaps they're popping up on police records, and perhaps you can then look at the sort of content they're enjoying online of saying, right, this person is one to watch, he could be problematic?
I think you'd have great difficulties there, Alex. How many millions of people do they have? I mean, we have this prevent strategy, which is supposed to look at terrorists, you know, and they're looking at, you know, 10, 11% of Islamic terrorists and then focusing on other things, while the MI5 are saying Islamic terrorism is the worst threat we have. So to try and monitor people's internet access, I mean, do we really want to live in that society? Is that how we want to be? I suggest probably not. But I think we just got to accept that these evil men exist. And as I was saying, the one thing I think we could do is hang him, because then we would save an absolute fortune and there'd be no possibility of him ever doing it again. And that would be the main thing for me. We just got to accept that evil men exist. I think the police did a very thorough investigation on this. They made sure he was convicted. So well done to the detectives and police officers involved in this case. But I can't see how we could have ever foreseen such wickedness.
I mean, talking about the police doing all their hard work to make sure a sentence is delivered, how does it feel then when you go to court, you've put in the hours, you've done a thorough investigation, you've followed every single rule in the book to make sure you can get that prosecution? How does it then feel, for instance, if these sentencing guidelines go through, where there's a mitigation put in place, that there's a softer sentence because someone's from a minority religion or an ethnic minority?
Well, it's a scandal, isn't it? We were told just in the last few months, I think, by senior police officers and Labour politicians that the idea of two-tier justice was a right-wing conspiracy, and suddenly all these conspiracy theories come true. And the whole criminal justice system is dishonest. And I always reflect back to being a young policeman and stopping somebody and thinking, why is he not in prison? Because he got 9 years. He broke into a house. He got 9 years for rape and 2 for the burglary. So in my young mind, 9 plus 2 equals 11. But of course, the 2 was concurrent to the 9, so that's 9, and he only served about half, so 9 plus 2 equals 4.5. And that's the dishonesty of the criminal justice system. And it's not fair, and it leaves the public vulnerable, and the public need to feel safe. And so if we're not going to hang these characters, then they need to be locked away for a very long time.
Now, I want to talk to you now about the Just Stop Oil protesters, because one thing I've never understood is every time someone's given a sentence, what then happens is they only serve half of it. I'm like, why not just give them half the sentence and they serve the whole of it? That just seems like a ridiculous thing that happens in the UK. Right, you've got to go to prison for 4 years, but you're only going to be in prison for 2. Well, why not just give them 2 then? But this has happened now in the case of Just Stop Oil. The co-founder, Roger Hallam, had his sentence reduced by a year after a High Court appeal. He was 16 activists challenging jail terms of between 15 months and 5 years. Thankfully, 10 of them have had their appeals dismissed, but 6 have been fortunate in actually having those sentences reduced. Does that sort of thing really get on your wick?
Of course it does, and I'm afraid you're behind the times, Alex, because they only do 40% of their time in prison, not 50. We can only be hopeful of 50. And what gets me with these, they're all champagne socialists, these Just Stop Oil people. And the other thing about them, they're all very fair weather, aren't they? You never see them doing this in the rain. You know, it's got to be in the sunshine when they're gluing their hands to the road and stopping working class people getting to their jobs. I think what annoys the public really is when the police are not as robust with such people as they would be if they were Millwall football fans who were causing some trouble because they wanted the manager sacked or something. They see people treated in different ways, and it isn't on. And I think the problem here is that where I went to Hendon, which was very militaristic, the police training centre, and marched around, no old training officers go to university, and they're on common ground with these sort of middle-class champagne socialists who are glued to the floor, and we need a few more, ex-army guys in the police to make sure they're a bit more robust.
And it seems to be a referendum on the death penalty is something you'd also endorse. Mike Neville, thank you ever so much, former Met Police Detective Chief Inspector. Before we go to break, do you know what? When it comes to the death penalty, I'm just at the camp that I just can't, if killing's wrong, I can't condone anyone killing anyone. But is it high time we had a referendum on that? I know which way I would vote, which wouldn't be the same way as Mike's, but that, in a democracy, perhaps we need to have that conversation. Right, we're going to take an ad break now. Do we also need to have a conversation about yet more NHS guidelines going down the whole woke route of, gender this, gender that? You can be a man and say you're a woman. Oh, forget medicine, forget biology, forget the things that are supposed to underpin a health service. That's for the birds. Times have changed. You can have a big old beard and a lunchbox and you can still be called Pamela. We're going to be discussing that after this.
I think the most cautious estimates would suggest 2 months. I've seen other estimates suggest Ukraine can fight at least 6 months. One of the last things Joe Biden did before leaving office was to send through a huge tranche of military aid. So Ukraine is stocked up, but not all weapons are equal.
Yes.
Clearly. And some of the most valuable, precious, high-tech stuff is what they'll run low on first. And the most obvious thing is Patriot missiles. Patriot missiles defend places like Kyiv, where I'm talking to you now.
Hello, welcome back to the show now. I teased you, didn't I? I teased you provocatively just before the break about what we're going to be talking about now. Basically, Pamela, with her big beard and her bulging lunchbox, wants you to know that she is a woman. And if you were NHS staff, you would have been told that absolutely she is, and you must treat her as such. Well, this is according to official guidance from NHS Scotland, stating employees must use the correct name and pronouns for transgender colleagues. I mean, I hate the way they try and gaslight us to distrust or to believe in something that's not before our eyes. Look, mate, you got blimmin' 6 o'clock shadow. You're wearing sort of skinny leggings that show me very clearly, and you know it's showing me very clearly, that you are not indeed a woman. You can stick on a bit of lipstick and, I don't know, sort of play around doing a sort of, I'm actually a girl. But you're not, are you? And you're called Derek, so get over it. How dangerous is this stuff, though? I mean, I've had enough of it. I think it's a joke, and I think it's injurious on people's mental health that we're all being told to go along with the make-believe. But in a medical setting, when you've got female wards and male wards, and when people are in hospital, they're at their most vulnerable. They might need to have someone to, I don't know, fiddle about with their catheter, give them a sponge bath if they're injured. It's when people, all you got to lie in is that weird smock thing where your backside hangs out. There you go, I didn't say it, did I? Phew, got away with that one. It's not the setting that you want. You kind of want to be treated delicately. It's not the setting where you want some big, grizzly, 6'5" rugby player with a bit of nail varnish on to tell you his name's Jane. Let's speak to Carrie Clark, Director of GenSpect UK, about her thoughts on all of this. Carrie, great to have you on the programme. I mean,
Thank you so much for having me, Alex.
I'm so fed up with hearing all of this nonsense. It's insulting as a woman. Frankly, I think when men keep their beards and put on a dress and say, call me a woman, it's no better than someone putting on blackface and pretending they're of a different race. It's insulting. And normally they play along with these really quite misogynistic tropes of what a woman should be. Ow, it's my period. Oh, look at me, I've fallen over. But rather than it just irritating me and thinking it's a form of mental illness, it is dangerous in a medical setting, isn't it?
It is, and it's time for employers to get with the programme about this. We've had a series of court cases. NHS Fife versus Peggy is going on right now, in which tens of thousands of pounds of taxpayer money is being used to defend these insane cases where employers try to compel the speech of their employees. They don't have the right to do that. It's not kind and respectful to compel people's speech. And it's particularly dangerous for women and girls for whom sex recognition is really, really important.
Do you think that there does need to be, let's play devil's advocate, do you think there does need to be some sort of carving out of a space, some guidelines for the odd character that is a man who would rather be a woman? Or should it just be, look, get real, that might be how you feel, and we're not going to make your life difficult over it, but you know, broader society doesn't work that way and you've got to adapt.
Well, the other thing is that I don't think this is kind or respectful to trans-identified people either, and I think before people transition and take these huge steps, they need to be made aware that the whole of society is not obliged to recognise their self-identity and that they're going to encounter people who have different beliefs about this subject who might not be happy using preferred pronouns. And that's something that they need to discuss before people undertake these steps.
What on earth did all these people with gender dysphoria, and I kind of feel that there weren't many of them on Earth, it seems to have mushroomed and come out of the floorboards everywhere. But what did they do before the whole sort of pronoun thing came about? I mean, were they sort of crying in the corner of their bedrooms going, oh no, they didn't call me she and her? I mean, how did people survive before the pronouns?
Well, no, I don't think they were. I think they accepted that asking somebody to use your preferred pronouns is a matter of, it's a one-to-one personal thing. It's not something that you can have a policy about. You know, it's so different for an individual to request to somebody that they know quite well, would you mind doing this, than it is to have your employer, who has so much institutional power over you, whether you earn a living, compelling you to use these pronouns in your workplace.
You said earlier on in this interview that, you know, these authorities, you know, these public bodies need to get with the programme. Things have changed and they need to drop all of this nonsense and stop forcing this stuff on employees. You've also written a brilliant piece on Substack and a report about puberty blockers and the fact that detransitioners were never consulted. Talk to me about that.
So it doesn't look like it, Alex. So I'm the director of GenSpect UK, and GenSpect runs project called Beyond Trans, which provides subsidised therapy to people who've detransitioned. We're actually the only specialist service in the UK for detransitioners because the NHS doesn't have a pathway to look after them. So if the puberty blocker trial team were looking for somebody to talk to about detransition, we kind of thought they might have reached out to us. We thought we might have heard from them. But as far as we can tell, none of our service users have been consulted in the design of this trial. And that's absolutely outrageous because detransitioners probably have more than any other group to say about the outcomes of medical transition.
What is the rate of detransitioning? Because I just want to ask you about this, because my sort of potted theory is that somewhere down the line there's going to be a big scandal in about 10 years' time or so, where a whole cohort of people say we've been essentially brainwashed, led up the garden path by people who should have had our safeguarding as their number one interest. We were forced down a medical route when we might have just been confused as pubescents, or we might have had autism, or we're just gay and we felt like we didn't quite know what we were doing, but it was sort of pushed upon us so much that we were born in the wrong body. We did it, and now we've mutilated ourselves, and therefore we're going to have, you know, multiple court cases against people in the education profession, the medical profession, against governments even, to pay for the damage that's been done. What rate of people who go through medical gender change do then detransition, and what recourse do they have to hold people accountable for what happened to them? Or basically, is no one accountable but themselves?
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult for us to tell what detransition rates are because the data collection and the follow-up of patients who've been treated with this incredibly experimental treatment has been absolutely appalling. So we know that it takes somewhere between 8 to 11 years for transition regret to manifest. So we really need long-term follow-up. And the NHS hasn't made any effort to do that. They were supposed to complete a data linkage study that would have found out what had happened to the roughly 2,000 children that were prescribed puberty blockers in NHS gender clinics. But there's been no progress on that. They're going to push ahead with a new trial in which they're going to medicalise a whole new cohort of young people. And we haven't even found out what happened to the last lot.
And I mean, what you work with these people directly? What are their feelings? Are they, are they angry when it comes to perhaps how easily it was to be pushed down a medical pathway?
Oh, I think they feel so betrayed. I think they feel so betrayed. We know from surveys with detransitioners that around 3/4 of them don't return to the original doctor that set them on this medical pathway because they just feel so angry and traumatized about dealing with the medical profession. So the fact that the NHS is getting ready to make more detransitioners without even providing for the casualties of the last experiment it did is just a real betrayal to the people that they've already hurt.
And when someone has gone down, I suppose it's different in different cases, gone down that route of changing their gender and much later feel remorseful about it, how easy is it to detransition?
It's not easy, and people who detransition have really complex physical and mental health needs, and they're left navigating incredibly complicated situations in day-to-day life. If you're a woman who's taken testosterone for a very long time and you present as male and you want to revert back to your birth sex, you suddenly find yourself being read as male in public, having to explain to everybody, that no, actually, I'm female, facing this challenge everywhere. It's really complicated. And when we talk about employers as well, like the NHS, there's all of this focus on people who identify as trans, but detransitioners are employees as well. Parents of gender distressed kids are employees. Children of transgender people are employees. And they all have strong feelings about this subject as well. Employers don't seem to take into consideration the fact that there are these other groups that they need to be considered in policy making.
And working with these people and looking at some of those heartbreaking stories of people whose lives are irrevocably changed after having transition treatments, is there any space for transition treatments to be offered at all, or would you rather see them essentially wiped out?
So GenSpec's position is that there are no children who should be given irreversible sex change treatments, puberty blockers, or cross-sex hormones. It's more complicated when we talk about adults. I think if we're going to have a conversation about preventing people from doing things over the age of majority, then we probably need to talk about whether 18 is the right age for that. And it's a really, really big conversation. But the main thing is that this is not healthcare. It's not evidence-based, it's not safe, and it's not ethical. So in our view, these are radical body modification procedures. If adults want to have radical body modification procedures, that's up to them. But it shouldn't be provided as healthcare, and it certainly shouldn't be paid for out of the public purse.
Carrie, thank you ever so much for talking to us. Carrie Clark, director there of GenSpect UK, doing incredible work with people who are detransitioning after what I think is going to be a big future scandal against the NHS medicalising a mental health condition. We're going to take a short break now, but when I come back, we're going to be doing another news roundup, talking about those internecine wars inside Reform UK, the softer sentencing as well, with Lord Craig McKinley, Conservative peer. That is coming up after this. I will see you in just a moment. Welcome back to the show. Some brilliant, wonderful, excellent news for you right now. This is going to make your day. Get you ready for the weekend and the parties you're going to have, because Britain is going places. We are so welcoming. We're so kind. We're so nice. We're top of the league table when it comes to people breaking into our country. That's right. 235 Channel migrants arrived in the UK yesterday on four boats, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, about 60 people to the boat. Whack them in there. Come along. Welcome to Britain. We can't wait to have you. You're exactly what we've been looking for. Please come. Add to the burden on our public services. Oh, that's right. If you don't want to work, we're going to give you a hotel room and loads of money, because it's going to make us feel really good about ourselves. Don't you worry that Nana McLean up in Scotland is freezing her little bones off because she's not allowed a winter fuel allowance. No, 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 no. You're more important. You're exactly what we're looking for. It takes the total this week to 1,613. Yeah, over a third of the total who have arrived this year. I mean, apparently 26,911 migrants have arrived since Sir Keir Starmer became Prime Minister, but that's okay, because we all feel so good that we're helping out all of these people. Do you know, on that point, Someone said something to me the other day, and I thought, that is so good. I'm going to remember that. I'm going to say it. Might even say it on air. So maybe I should do that now. Someone said, if you are at war, you send your women and children away to protect them. If you're going to war, you send your men. Anyway, just thought that was a very good point, well made. Let's do a bit of a news roundup now with Lord Craig McKinley, Conservative peer. Craig, brilliant to have you on the show. Let's talk about what appears to be a bit of a spat in reform between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. I mean, we do know that Elon Musk had made comments saying, well, maybe this guy should be leader. And Nigel, I think, took it on the chin and said, well, you know, I'll have a word with Elon. And then, you know, there are people going, well, maybe Nigel's being a little bit soft. He's not sort of banging the drum on issues anymore, but Rupert Lowe is. Then now it seems that something's gone on and Rupert has done an interview with Andrew Pearce and said that, you know, Nigel is messianic. He's brilliant. He is a fantastic leader, but maybe things aren't so good inside the party. Some people saying this is terrible, you know, this needs to be sorted out. Others are going, well, you know, piffle. It's a Conservative Party and the Conservative aligned media who are going to be making the most of this. They're just two people who have different points of view. Other people say, well, you know, if Rupert Lowe doesn't like reform, maybe he should jog on. And then other people saying, actually, maybe he's got a point. You, of course, were once upon a time a UKIPper, as was I, and then migrated back to the Conservative Party. So what do you make of all of this noise surrounding this spat?
Right, well, I mean, I always watch happenings within what was UKIP, Brexit Party reform, obviously with interest, because I was one of those founders of UKIP a very, very long time ago. And I must say, I've been very impressed with Rupert Lowe, the type of things that he's getting his teeth into in Parliament. He's addressing a lot of those things in your introduction about cross-channel migrants and migrant crime and all sorts of things that perhaps have not been discussed enough over the last few years. So he's on a bit of an ascendancy, and I think everybody recognises the things that he's doing. But your experience of Nigel, you worked with him in the past, as did I. Now ask yourself one question. Is there anybody over a course of just a matter of years, probably 5 years, where he is still friendly with those same people? It seems to be a trait of Nigel, for good or bad, that he seems to fall out with people. And you will find that his circle of activists that are around him don't seem to last very long, whether that's, you know, Gawain Towner, the previous press secretary. He had a fairly good run with the various parts of the, you know, UKIP to reform to and Brexit Party in between, but even he's been slung out on his ear for some reason. So dare I say, it just seems to be situation normal. I haven't really commented on it. I let the party do whatever it's going to do, and I'm not taking any great satisfaction of its ups and downs. But this falling out just seems to be situation normal. I expect we'll see more of it. The trouble is, of course, with the MPs in Parliament, the Reform MPs, these are people who've never had to spend that much time together before. They've probably barely even met each other before, but now they're living cheek by jowl.
Okay, just to pick up on a few of those things. So first of all, Gawain Towler's not here to sort of say what he thinks. I know that he's still very close to Nigel, though, and would have very warm words to say about Nigel. And they had a sort of working relationship that spanned decades. I myself worked for a very long time at Nigel's side and still consider him a very good friend, so I've had no falling out with him. So perhaps that isn't entirely true. That's not to say that, like other political leaders, they have had their disagreements and there have been power dynamics and, things have changed. I think that's probably true of many people who lead political parties. But it's interesting. You picked up on something that I've heard a number of people say, which is that Rupert Lowe has really been talking the talk on social media and saying things that people would think or assume that reform should be saying. Are you sort of saying, is the negative of that Nigel's not doing those things? Do you get a sense, actually, that Nigel's sort of, de-Nigeling?
No, not at all. I mean, you look at the sort of the column inches that are devoted to Nigel, and we're discussing him right now as well. You know, they're massively out there. I wouldn't say his coverage has diminished in any way at all. It just happens, in my view, that Rupert Lowe is pressing some of those buttons that I think are of great interest to the public at the moment. Immigration certainly being one of them, and the anti-woke agenda. I mean, things that we are talking about within the Conservative Party, of course we are. But Rupert is, is saying them very loudly, and they're discussion points that need to be said in this country. So I think he's currently in the ascendancy, but they'll probably have a falling out with Nigel, or they'll part their ways, and Rupert. Well, I don't know what Rupert will do, but as I say, these are people that haven't had to be close to each other.
You say that, Craig. But Rupert Lowe is a Brexit Party MEP, as was I. As was Richard Tice. So actually, I mean, Lee Anderson has worked for a long period of time at GB News with Nigel Farage. So actually, apart from James McMurdoch, who was the surprise, the surprise MP, if you will, they do all know each other, and they have worked together under quite stressful circumstances when it comes to the Brexit Party MEPs.
Yeah, well, I think the time they had together as Brexit Party MEPs was quite a short time, wasn't it? Not quite as full on as being a British MP within the Westminster environment. So, and the point I'm making is that these people came together without long-term depth of knowledge. I mean, I must say, if you're a Conservative MP, you tend to have known quite a lot of your chums around you for a very
and you hate them, and you plot against them, and you slag them off. I mean, the Conservatives are the world leaders at that.
Doesn't mean we all get on very, very well, but at least you've got a crowd that you've known for a long time. But it's rather different for Reform because they are new, and they're newly elected MPs, and it's a new environment and a whole new focus on them. And I think that is why we're probably talking about them now, because the focus is on what does Reform stand for. We know what they're against. We certainly know what they're against. And I think the against things is what a lot of people in the country would be against, because it's just a statement of the obvious. But we're now trying to tease away what do they stand for. And they are now coming under scrutiny, correct scrutiny, to find out what they are for.
Right, I mean, but the same can be said of Kemi Badenoch. What does she stand for? She's like, I'm not going to give you the menu of my policies yet. I'm not about to do that. And everyone's like, well, fair enough, because we're a gazillion miles away from a general election. Reform's a new party. It's got to formulate its manifesto, and no one should be printing it right now, because that ain't relevant for 4 years' time. Things change, so perhaps we can forgive them for that.
That's fair enough, and I rather wish we were giving out a bit more of a flavour of our menu, particularly in advance of the council elections in just literally a few tens of days' time. I think
most of which have been cancelled by Conservative authorities.
Some of them have, yeah, but it's on the initiative of the Labour government, of course. But no, I rather wish all these elections were taking place. I can't see why we need to delay just because of another movement of chairs around the,
never look a gift horse in the mouth. If they were going to lose seats to Reform, you can understand why the Conservative authorities didn't want those elections to happen.
I think you're talking from a Reform perspective. I don't think that
I'm talking from a neutral perspective, which what we know when you look at the local authorities who have taken up the offer that was made by Angela Rayner of cancelling elections, and it wasn't an offer, it wasn't imposed upon them. She said, if you want to, you can. A vast number of Conservative authorities went, oh, whew, thank you. I just think that is, evidential. But listen, let's move on to talk about this softer sentencing, because this must boil your blood. The fact that the sentencing guidelines are now saying, if someone's from a religious minority or an ethnic minority, you've got to treat them differently because, I don't know, they've had a harder time, or actually they normally get worse sentences because there's inbuilt prejudice amongst judges or whatever it may be. So actually what you should do is just knock off or calculate into the value of whatever punishment you give them, that you might be overdoing it because they're from a minority, so underdo it. I mean, that is two-tier justice, isn't it? That's ridiculous.
Well, there's no doubt there is, yes, absolutely. And when you peel away the layers of this, you find that David Lemmy looms large in some on which this was based. Now, I was a magistrate for 12 years. I suppose I sort of still am. I'm on the supplemental list, but don't sit anymore. Now, I have got on my wall behind me my justice oath. Now, let me just lean back and tell you what it says. It says, to do right to all manner of people after the laws and usages of this realm without fear or favour. Now, what does that mean, without fear or favour? I think that is really rather fundamental. So what this new sentencing guideline is saying is actually the judicial oath that all judges and magistrates have taken in this country perhaps needs rewording, and that there are certain people which will have different fears or favour applied to them, and not even-handed justice, which we've all come to expect. So this is very, very serious.
I mean, Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood says that she's going to strip the powers of the two-tiered justice quango if they go through with these guidelines. Why doesn't she just can she legislate to just say these guidelines are not going to happen? If this is an independent quango, can she stand in the way of it? Do you think this is just sort of paying lip service when the Labour Party actually quite like this being put into place?
Well, I heard that there was a representative of government is actually on that council that actually sets these rules. So to now say that she knew nothing about it, I frankly find a little hard to believe. But what this shows up, Jess, is, Alex, is the how we've got so many quangos, particularly created during the Tony Blair years, where power has been taken away from Parliament into the hands of unelected, unknown quangos. I mean, this is what we fought against to get out the European Union, but we've got embedded within us quangos that do this, that and the other, and the Sentencing Council is but one, where Parliament seems to be totally bypassed. I mean, another one that's in a similar basis, I think, because it's justice related, are the non-crime hate incidents. Where did they come from? They came from, the Police Chiefs Council, didn't pass through Parliament. None of us, I don't remember ever having a say on it at all. And hey presto, you've got quite a serious administration of justice, nothing to do with Parliament, in the hands of people that, frankly, we don't know who they are. And I bet if you peel the surface back, they've been appointed and they'll hold those, those views that,
so on that,
diplomatically, perhaps the majority of people would not agree.
I agree with exactly what you're saying here, which is essentially quangos are set up to basically impose left-wing ideology on people in an untouchable fashion. We're going to say, oh, we're the climate change quango. Net zero is so important. We're independent. It's not politicians telling this. We're telling the politicians we're independent. There's similar things now happening with the council, who all sitting there nattering away under the guidance of Dominic Grieve, who was never a Conservative, let's be real, about what Islamophobia is. Does that worry you?
No, it does worry me. We don't have a blasphemy law in this country. The last sort of remnants of it were sort of cleansed from our legislation some decades ago, and that was for protection of Christianity. We don't even protect that anymore as a Christian country. But that's right. It should have without fear or favour, I think, is a very powerful doctrine. But we seem to be moving back towards these sort of non-fear or favour doctrines in terms of two-tier, if we're using that, and preference for some over others. That is not how the fundamental basis of this country is, the one of complete free speech and the right to offend. And I'm afraid if we lose those rights, I think we'll be in a poorer place. It might sound appealing in of community cohesion, all of those good things, but the reality is we lose one of the very powerful facets of this country, and we do that at our peril, in my view. So, and if you want to, repeating somebody from the past, no, no, no.
I couldn't agree more. To add to that, it's worth pointing out that this government have decided to get rid of any tax relief for churches, which is going to cost them millions of pounds, and see a number of churches having to shut down. But they're going to be giving millions of extra pounds of funding to protect mosques. There you go.
That's not entirely true, because what there was a VAT relief on repairs, and that has not been continued. All places of worship had that ability to have zero-rated work done on repairs to, not just churches but mosques and synagogues as well.
But then mosques are getting additional funding for their security. What's the difference?
Well, as are synagogues, of course, but no, there isn't any preferential treatment in tax. If you think that, Alex, that's not actually quite true. It's been withdrawn for everyone, so on that alone, there is no fear or favour.
But they are withdrawing the sort of tax relief on religious buildings, which largely churches have needed, because these are crumbling old buildings, right? And then at the same time providing money for things that aren't churches, other religious buildings which aren't going to churches. That's fair enough to say, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I mean we've got. You think of the age of our churches in this country. Many of them have been standing for a millennia.
Yeah.
But obviously many hundreds of years during the various parts of the Christian journey in this country, and they are in a pretty poor state, of course, and they need a lot of work. And that VAT relief, which I've actually been trying to fight for general listed properties, that was drawn some time ago, but it did retain for religious buildings. And you're quite right, the stock that requires that type of help is likely to be old stock of Christian churches.
Right, so and if we were leftists, we would say, oh, well, this legislation disproportionately affects these minorities. Well, this disproportionately affects churches in a big way.
No, it does. Certainly, I think this is an appalling decision by the government, because the other thing is it didn't actually cost that much money. It was literally in the low tens of millions a year, which seems to be, in the scheme of things, it's not even the skin on the custard, frankly.
It's always wonderful catching up with you, Craig. You're a man of great common sense and great, brilliant integrity and bravery. I'm just going to say one thing before we go to advert breaks. I love a good church, me. I go to church, I'm a Christian, but I actually love going to churches as buildings. Whenever I'm walking around a new town or a village, I like to just call in and have a look at them. They're architecturally beautiful. They're part of the rich fabric of this nation. Very often when you walk into a church in this day and age, what you will find is there's a little card reader here saying, we need a new roof, we need a new steeple. Unless you give to us, we're basically going to have to close down because we can't maintain the upkeep of these buildings. Now, what happens then is a developer might move in and turn it into a block of flats, or might be converted to a mosque. Hurrah. I know the situation that churches face. So when I go and visit a church, I try and make sure that I always connect my phone to that card reader and say, you know what? My £10 I'm spending today might mean this place of worship stays open for another 10 years. That's just what I do. It's up to you what you do. Right, we're going to take a short break now, and I want to know what you think about things, though, because it's your opportunity to get in touch and throw in your 2 bits after the break. The number to call, 03444 99 1000. It is your standard network rate. You can use that to send me a WhatsApp or leave me a voice note on WhatsApp. You can text me 87222. You have to write the word TALK, T-A-L-K, capital letters, and then type your message. We're on X at talkTV, and I'm back to hear from you after this.
I mean, I'm pretty confident this war will end in the coming weeks, certainly by the spring, by the summer.
Okay.
I interpret the various statements by various parties, especially Sergei Lavrov's statement yesterday about the deployment of British and European security guarantee forces. They're not peacekeepers, would be an act of war. I see that as sort of the jousting before or as we go into negotiations. So
Hello, welcome back. It's a Friday, and that means we are in party mood. That is right. And in the doggy bag of delights for you today is musical chairs. That is next up on the agenda because our schedule is a little bit altered. That's because various people have got lurgy, they've got talkitis. And so you are going to be blessed with Peter Cardwell, who is in for Ian Collins after me. And then in the further game of musical chairs, following him in Drive is going to be Kevin O'Sullivan. Same old amazing presenters, same old brilliant shows, slightly different slots. So just stay tuned, it's going to be fun. Right, now, let's speak to you, shall we? Because coming up now is your opportunity to let me know what you think about any of the stories we've been talking about today. And let's cross to John, who's in Lincolnshire. Hi, John.
Hi, Alex. Great show.
Oh, thanks.
I wanted to just say I'm absolutely sick and tired of basically the Conservatives, Labour, and I don't want to see Reform have this spat. I want someone that has a can-do attitude. And I seriously get so annoyed with these daily reports of refugees in the Channel. Why is it that no political party can show the government by getting a boat themselves? They're businessmen. They know what they're doing, recruiting ex-servicemen, ex-maritime personnel. And if they were to deport 20, turn round the boats, then at least that shows the government that they are a party with a can-do attitude.
I'm glad you said this, John, because I often think so much of politics in the West, especially when it comes to the supranational, claptrap that you hear being spouted by the EU and the UN, it's all a nonsense. It defies the law of Occam's razor, right? And you kind of think, there's a load of boats coming across the Channel from France. They have no right to enter our territorial waters. They have no right to just land on our shores uninvited. And back in times of old, if that was, the Normans or the Vikings or the Spanish Armada, we'd have done something about it. We'd have been like, you there, what do you think you're doing, creeping into our waters? Off you go. Whereas now it just becomes gobbledygook and claptrap of maritime laws. And you've got to do this and you can't turn it back because of this treaty and that convention and this particular thing. And if you break international... And so all the while, the people traffickers are sitting there going, this is blimmin' brilliant. I'm earning millions, billions, funding terrorist organisations and mercenaries and, dodgy cartels who are making a fortune out of human misery. And actually, if a country just went, you know what? 12 miles off our coast is our territorial water space. You're not coming in. And do what Australia did and just go, right, no boats pass, no boats pass, no boats pass. Or even had the audacity to, I don't know, if you could rescue the middle of the Channel and bring them that direction, surely you can take them that direction and go, by the way, France, we gave you a lot of money to stop this happening. You missed one. Here you go. Have that. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, well, no, let's just have people dying in the Channel and spend millions of pounds, for not actually policing it and actually make sure that some of the worst human beings on the planet get to enrich themselves. It's just madness. And I think you're right. If we were to just take the logical approach, which is you can't enter our waters like Australia did back in the day, people are like, well, it's very busy, the Channel, the shipping was busiest stretch of water known to man. I mean, I'm sorry, but I'm pretty sure the waters around Australia were probably shark infested. And they were like, nope, your boat's not coming in. If we just did that, we only had to do it once or twice, and the optics that would go out internationally would make a lot of people thinking of getting in a boat think twice.
Absolutely. I'm ex-military, and leadership isn't about being liked. It's about being a leader. and you lead by example, and then people will follow. And I just think that, like you said, the optics are turning round one boat filmed, presented to television, then that would show that the country just isn't going to accept it. I am absolutely sick of people saying to me that they don't have the services, the NHS, the prices of our utilities going up. I'm absolutely sick of it.
And you know what, when it comes to what would the French do if we suddenly took them back to French waters, I remember the good old days when there'd be sort of hosepipe fights because they'd tried to nick scallops from our side of the channel. I mean, you know, this stuff's been going on for ages. I think we should just get on with getting on. John in Lincolnshire, thank you ever so much. Now let's talk to Nigel in Londonshire. Londonshire? Where's Londonshire? I don't know where that is. It's probably better than the real London. I'm going to go there right now, if only Londonshire existed. Nigel, now, our previous caller had said that leadership is not about being liked. Do you think that that's a fair comment to make?
Well, I think it's a reasonable comment, but I just want to throw something into your mix quickly. You said you like going to churches. If you want to go to a nice little church, it's a very unknown church. There's a little chapel inside Great Ormond Street Hospital, and there's a news photograph that it's very, very pretty and really quite ornate, so you may enjoy that.
Oh, really? Do you know there's a chapel just by us here where you've got the big medical school? What is the medical school behind us here in London Bridge?
Or Guy's, one of them.
Yeah, exactly. And you go through there and you can walk onto the campus and there's a really beautiful little Victorian chapel inside Guy's, and it's got like beautiful like mother of pearl walls, and it's sort of the arts and craft movement. It is the most stunning thing I've ever seen.
It really is.
But what really gets my goat is you walk in, the first thing you see is some sort of trigger warning going, oh, you might find some of this stuff offensive if you love BLM.
That's crazy. It really is. It really is. Well, look, I rang you about Nigel Farage and reform.
Yeah.
And I said to your lady who took my telephone call.
That's the gorgeous Abby, whose last day it is today. We're going to miss you, Abs.
Oh, well, goodbye, Abby. Thanks for being a part of the team. I think it's important to say that I don't believe that for reform will ever be a standalone party in government, ever.
Right. Why is that?
I think that... Why?
Yeah.
Well, because at the moment they've only got 5 seats. How are you going to send them about 200 seats or more, or get so many votes to overturn a huge Labour majority? I think what will happen is they will join forces at the next election with the Tories to form a coalition. Because, you know, I cannot see ever that Reform will do... And when you look at Reform's website, their opening statement says, let me get my... glasses. It says quite clearly.
Let me get mine as well.
Is the alternative? Only reform will stand up for British culture, identity and values. We will freeze immigration, stop the boats. Well, it's a wonderful throwaway line by saying we will freeze immigration, stop the boats. But the next question is how.
Well, you know, I mean, we've heard this a lot from, political parties do this. It's sloganism, isn't it? Because what we've had Keir Starmer say is we're going to smash the gangs. Rishi Sunak said stop the boats. This is sort of, you know, the 3-word slogans, take back control, drill, baby, drill. It's a sort of golden rule of politics that you put your messaging down to the simplest form of 3 words. But it seems to me, according to the polling, a lot of people would actually trust Reform more than anybody else to deliver on those things. You talk about them being a party with only 5 MPs, and arguably someone could say that all parties start from somewhere. The Labour movement itself at one point didn't exist. It was the Tories and the Whigs, or whatever they were called. New things happen. In fact, if you look in Canada, what's interesting there, the history of Canadian politics, it was also a party called Reform that actually got rid of the legacy right-wing party in Canada. You look in France, En Marche has basically put Les Républicains out of business.
I understand all of that, but just going back to what you said about slogans.
Yeah.
The British electorate, and I'm one of them, is fed up and bored with slogans. What we want is action.
Right.
These slogans are dull. They're unincentivizing. When you say drill, baby, drill, at least Trump is actually doing drill, baby, drill.
Right.
So at least
this is the thing. We don't mind a slogan as a selling point as long as you then do what you said you were going to do.
I think what we need is a fundamental wake-up of politicians who actually recognise what they stand for. What they stand for is being paid by the public purse to endorse what the public want, not what they think is good.
Oh, you can't have that, Nigel. That's populism. Populism is dangerous.
Let's see.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, Nigel, in Londonshire, whatever I called it, Londonshire. Lovely to hear from you. Now, talking about 3-word slogans, I'm going to give you a 5-word slogan, because this is Talk, the home of common sense, and we're back after this. Hello, welcome back. Now, Rachel Reeves needs to find a way to save a penny or two. Our public finances are pretty stretched, and if we're going to see that huge boost to defence, then we're going to have to make savings elsewhere, not only to the foreign aid budget, but clearly to welfare. Because it turns out that our bill to pay for people off sick is going to account for a quarter of money raised by income tax come 2030. That is absolutely insane. So for every £4 taken off the public to pay for stuff in the country, £1 of that is going to people not working because they're sick. And what Rachel Reeves has sort of said is, well, we need to focus on the NEETs, which is a sort of Blairist word for not in employment, education or training. We're talking about the sort of 16 to 25-year-old demographic who at the moment are the ones most likely to not be going to work or school. No, they're just sitting at home mentally ill because they've got anxiety or some such. And she has said rightfully that we need to focus on that area. And so I welcome all of this, the getting realism that seems to be smacking Labour around the face at the moment. But other people are saying, well, that's not really going to be enough. Well, let's speak to Jean-André Prager, who's a former special advisor to the Prime Minister, a long-standing Number 10 welfare expert, and indeed the report author and senior fellow at Policy Exchange. Hi there, Jean-André.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Really great to have you. So tell me about what your report has dug up when it comes to the paltry state of the nation's finances, particularly when it comes to sick pay.
Well, our report focuses on both incapacity benefit, as you've mentioned, and disability benefit. So PIP and ESA, or the support group in ESA, and the UC health element. And as you've indicated, it's a significant challenge for the state. We will spend about over £100 billion by the end of the Parliament on both ill health and disability benefits. And so our report tries to look at ways that we can try and rebalance the system. I think we have got the wrong incentives in our disability and ill health benefit system, where we encourage people to show what they cannot do rather than trying to encourage them to show what they can do. And so we take a kind of philosophical approach in our report to try and change the emphasis and incentives in the system.
So I remember back in the day when tabloid newspapers used to love running stories on, here's Joseph, he says he can't work because he's got a bad back, and there he is jumping out of an aeroplane for charity. And you used to get a lot of these sort of, you know, naming and shaming exercises of disability fraud, benefits cheats. I remember the programme Benefits Street, because people who are on benefits had such a bad reputation. But it seems to me that, you know, gone are the days of I've got a bad back and I can't go to work, but you've just run a half marathon. It seems now that the big area of sick pay is going to people who it's going to be kind of hard to prove whether or not what they're saying is truthful, because it is things such as anxiety and depression. You can't really turn up with a sort of weeping boil on your arm and say, look, there's some anxiety right there. And it seems to me a lot of GPs are signing people off work because of anxiety and depression. And also there are a lot of people online telling other people how to game the system and answer questions correctly so they get that sort of support. How do you then drill down into that and separate the people who genuinely are unable to work because their mental health condition is so terrible that unless they had a good week off or four, that they're going to go kaboom, and those people who frankly just don't want to work and actually might find their mental health benefits from leaving the house and going into an office environment?
I think you make it's a very interesting question. I think the major challenge with these benefits are they're functional assessments. So they're not based on someone's condition. They're based on whether you can fulfill a function, and that's for both PIP and for the work capability assessment. And so, you know, in our report, we suggest that for all these assessments, someone should have to provide medical evidence, because, as you say, there is a challenge about making sure that these benefits are robust when we give them out, and so far we don't think the right balance is probably there, with too much emphasis, as you say, probably on the function element of it, rather than enough emphasis put on kind of medical evidence in the system. So the recommendations we make.
But does this mean essentially we're just going to have to get a little bit tough, a little bit more strict, a little less soft, a little less kind-hearted? Because we know that there's multiple unoccupied jobs vacancies in the jobs market. We know that there are certain industries crying out for people to go and work. We also know that working from home is a thing. So if you are, part of the bad back brigade, then actually perhaps there could be a job for you that you don't have to exert any sort of, physicality in order to fulfill your duties. It seems to me, though, that despite the marketplace for jobs being more flexible than it's ever been when it comes to saying you can work from home, you can choose hours that suits you, when it comes to people not working at all, that number just keeps going up and up. Have we essentially just become too soft?
Well, I think that the challenge is that these benefits were designed like in the early 2010s, and in the case of ESA, the ESA was, before then it was under the Labour Party. So, our understanding of health, and especially mental health, has changed drastically over the last 15 years, and our benefit system hasn't adequately, kept pace with that. And I think that's part of the problem, where we haven't properly reevaluated who we should be targeting these benefits for. And that just allowed the gateway to expand over these years. And I think we need a reevaluation, a kind of new and national conversation about where we should be providing the additional support. And I think that's part of the challenge. We haven't had a national conversation. And in our report, we suggest we need a new social contract here, where we basically encourage people to be more active and more engaged in society. And I think part of the failing of our benefit system is it's too binary. Either you receive an additional financial support or you don't, and there's nothing else in our system to encourage different types of behaviour.
It's been fantastic catching up with you. The author of that report, Jean-Andre Prager, former special advisor and ex-number 10 welfare expert. Right, we're going to take a short break now, but after that, we're hopping over the channel to speak to a beloved regular on this show, Adam Coleman, columnist at the New York Post, to find out what is going on in America. That's after this.
We're way ahead of reform when it comes to winning actual elections, when it gets people voting for who they want to represent them. I know actually during the election last year when I spoke to many traditional Conservative voters, reform for them was a protest, and I don't think I met many of whom actually wanted the reform in charge of the country in any way, shape or form. But of course that puts the onus back on us to make sure we put forward a credible, alternative, right-wing plan for running this country, and we'll focus very much on doing that. While it seems to me that reform are focused on arguing with each other, that's not what the public want to see.
Hello there, welcome back to the show. Right, what is going on in America in the ever-captivating drama of what Trump said next? I love it. Right, joining us now is Adam Coleman, columnist at the New York Post. Adam, I love it when you come on the programme. How are you today, my darling?
I'm doing wonderful. Thank you for having me back on.
Great. Is it not the crack of dawn where you are?
It's not too bad. It was almost 8 o'clock.
Yeah, look at you. I barely function at that time in the morning. I just sort of like grunt and groan and look a bit like a scarecrow. So you look beautiful, can I just say? Well done. Right, let's talk about what is going on. First of all, let's start with Ukraine. I mean, get this. Ursula von der Leyen, I don't know if as an American you're that familiar with her, of the sort of immovable Barnett. I am, because I was in the European Parliament with her as the European Commission President, and I don't have many kind words to say about her. And here she is saying Trump needs the support of the EU to end the war in Ukraine. I think, madam, it's probably the other way around, isn't it? But good to see that Donald Trump has essentially said, get your act together, Europe, and at least they're putting on the pantomime of getting their act together, which involved a summit yesterday that lasted hours on end, and they all came out having agreed nothing. Going brilliantly, isn't it?
Yeah, it sounds like, it's very interesting watching the EU react to Donald Trump, and instead of them thinking that Donald Trump is going to react to them. It's very clear that Donald Trump is leading the discussion. The EU seems to not have a clear answer as to how they want to try and move forward. And I think it's because, and I think this is not something that's new, the world leans on America to pay for everything, to start everything and to be a part of everything. And Donald Trump is saying, okay, then we want out. We want out of this war. We want the war to end. And the EU seems to not be willing to at least let him lead the charge. So if they think that they're going to, and I think it sounds like after Zelensky left the White House, he immediately ran over to the EU and, was trying to, or actually ran over to your country, was trying to get some money to fund the war some more. But I think that's a plan that's going to fall short because I don't think anybody really wants to do that for a long term. Now he's coming back to Trump saying that he wants peace, right? So something clearly happened in a matter of a few days. So I think the driving seat, Trump is in the driving seat when it comes to ending this war.
I mean, Donald Trump hasn't just caught the EU with their pants down. He's essentially pulled their pants down, because what's been clear to us in Europe who know the EU and how it functions from the beginning of all of this is Putin invaded Ukraine. The UK said, because we're not in the EU anymore, we're going to get on, we're going to give arms, this is terrible, no one can just invade another country in Europe, that must not happen, which I totally concur with. Then the EU were like, well, we can't apply sanctions, you see, because our economy is really closely tied to Putin's. Ooh, it's going to be a bit difficult cutting off those gas supplies because we've closed down our nuclear power stations and we kind of need it. Ooh, we don't want our weapons going over to Ukraine because if they do, you might provoke him and he's a little bit scary. And so the EU kind of did the best part of absolutely naff all and said, America, can you help? And my impression is most Americans go, where's Ukraine? What are we paying for? And Donald Trump's come around and said, like, this has got to end now. The difficulty is, of course, is the EU going, right, yes, we're going to stand to attention, we're going to sort this out. And they still can't blimmin' do it. So where do we go from here? We have now a meeting coming up in Saudi Arabia. I don't know what old Crown Prince What's-His-Chops is going to say to Zelensky. Who knows? But after that meeting, there is going to be a coming together of the Ukrainian team and the American team. What do you predict might come out of that?
I mean, I don't know specifically about this particular meeting, what will come out of it, but I think it's inevitable that the war is going to come to an end. Without money, without resources, there is no war to fight. And you'd be a fool to try and say, well, we're just going to do it ourselves, because clearly you can't, and you wouldn't be able to go as far as you have without outside money, without outside resources. So whether Zelensky wants this war to continue on or not, he's going to have this war come to an end. Trump hasn't shifted. He wants peace. He wants to bring both parties to the table. He wants it to stop. So I don't know what the resistance is initially coming from Zelensky's side, that he doesn't want the war to end.
I do know.
No, I'm not.
I do know.
Okay.
So let me sort of make it sort of simple in terms of where Europeans are at in all of this, because everything you say I totally agree with. But Europeans are kind of going, right, we keep hearing that Zelensky's got to do this, Zelensky's got to do that, Zelensky's wrong to say this, Zelensky shouldn't have said that. Zelensky was the one who got invaded. He was just minding his own business, badly running his own country, when Putin marches in with tanks, and we're like, blimey, we've seen this before in Europe. In fact, back in the day, under the Soviet Union, Russia marched into a lot of places with a lot of tanks and just took control of them, and we don't want it to happen again. So as much as we might criticise Europe for being rubbish in preventing that from happening, which clearly they have been, at the same time, a lot of Europeans are going, we're hearing a lot of what Trump has to say about Zelensky. Putin seems to have gotten away with it all, though, and that ain't good.
Well, and listen, I'm just taking Trump's word for it, but Trump has indicated that the Russian camp is open to ceasefire and peace. So that's why we're not really talking about it. It's because the issue doesn't seem to be coming from the Russian side wanting it to end. It seems to be coming from the Ukrainian side, and it's not to say that there's no reason why. I can understand some of his complaints when he was in the Oval Office, saying, listen, we had ceasefires before, what are our guarantees? And that's a whole different other story. So I can at least give him that a little bit of grace.
Yeah, it's the worry here, though, that, of course, Putin wants this war to end. He's not winning it. It's cost him 1 million lives, and it's, costing him millions of rubles as well. He's not winning it. He can't win it. It's a war of attrition, so he kind of needs to, get off the roller coaster now. But he probably thinks he's going to get off the roller coaster with a whole load of land that he didn't have before, with a whole load of gas fields, with coastal sites, which means he can control the Black Sea along with his mates in Iran and, who control the Red Sea. Is not the concern here that Putin is not going to be punished for what he did, and he's a bad man?
Yeah, I can understand that. But at the same time, I think we have to worry about one point than the next point. They have to come to the table to negotiate. And whether some sort of negotiation is as far as some sort of punishment because of what's going on, but there has to be some sort of willingness to compromise. Unfortunately, there's never going to be some sort of fairness when it comes to war and ending the war. Every side, because there's no clear winner as of right now, every side feels like they've been slighted and that they deserve something. When it comes to a compromise, that means both parties lose something.
But what is it that Putin's losing? Because he hasn't really been slighted. He's only gaining in this position. He went into a country, said, I want all of this land, has seized X amount of it, and is probably, as a result of these negotiations, going to walk away with a substantial chunk of what he essentially illegally seized by storming into another country and saying, I want this. I mean, that's the big worry here, that everyone does seem to lose other than Russia.
Well, I think this is where the negotiations come into play, and that's why the United States is trying to get involved. Maybe there is, and listen, I'm not an expert on this particular topic, and there are lots of things that are going to happen as far as the negotiations go. But there could be some sort of punishment. There could be some sort of sanction. We don't know this 100%, but I understand the fear behind it being, well, we just stop shooting each other and let's just go home and call it a day. I think there's going to be some more significant measures that are going to take place.
Let's talk now about the trade tariffs, because Donald Trump, he said, what is it? It's country, family, God tariffs. And he has said it's his favourite word, and he has banged it around a lot, hasn't he? And actually, it seems to relative success when he's threatened tariffs against Mexico and Canada. They've jumped to attention, much like the Europeans are now doing over defence spending, and sort of gone, OK, America's really peeved with us because we're not doing what we should be doing. But it seems now that he's rowing back on that a little bit. Why is he doing that? Is that because it would really negatively affect the American economy, Wall Street stocks? Is this because actually he's managed to extract, as a result of the threat of tariffs, what he needed from Mexico and Canada?
So I think the thing that's very interesting when it comes to Trump, and what a lot of people misunderstand about Trump, is that Trump has always been about negotiating, whereas in the past, when we have politicians, whatever they say is what it is actually going to be. So if they talk about something, that's actually what they want to do. And so he's written a book about it. He's talked about it multiple times. He goes for the big ask. The big ask is, we're going to hit you with massive tariffs. That's the big ask. But where it's going to come is somewhere in the middle. And somewhere in the middle is actually what he wants. So he may say, oh, we're going to tariff you 100% to what we're doing. But what he's actually wanting is actually maybe 50% of what he was asking for in the first place. And that's a hell of a lot more than where we were at before. So I think Trump is always going to use every tactic to negotiate, get someone's attention, bring them to the table, so they'll get upset because they're not used to negotiating. They're used to dictating and just saying, America, do this, and we just do it. And we don't care about our own resources or about our economy, as long as the bureaucrats and the certain politicians in our country get a little bit of back pay on the, some USAID money going to their pockets. But now we have someone who is saying, no, if you're going to tariff us 100% on this, then we're going to tariff you 100% on this. We want fairness when it comes to our economies. And right now, in many sectors, it seems to be lopsided.
Adam, it's always great catching up with you. I think one thing is true when it comes to Trump. He's pretty plain speaking. He said, I'm going to put America first, and he is. So I always think, just take the man at his word. Right, Adam Coleman there, columnist at the New York Post. Peter Cardwell's in
Hello
the
there,
studio.
lovely to see you.
Hello, my darling. What do you make of everything going on and Trumpism 2.0?
Well, it's
we haven't
interesting.
actually seen each other for ages.
I know we haven't.
Yeah,
no,
tell me.
It's fascinating. I mean, every day brings more revelations. And actually, if you think about what he wanted a month ago versus what he's got now, I mean, so many people are so focused on all the different things he says. I agree with Nigel Farage when he says, actually, take him seriously, but not literally. And month ago, Trump wanted two things. He wanted greater defence spending for many countries, and he also wanted people to very seriously think about peace in Ukraine. Now they're doing that in a way that they weren't a month ago, and he's got what he wants, which is really interesting.
Do you know what else I've noticed, actually? I don't know if it's just because it's now being underreported, if it's just stopped happening. Pre-Trump 2.0, you know, in the Biden era, you had all the crazies, didn't you? Like, oh my God, it's going to be a disaster. Oh, America this, all the sort of leftist organisations that we've got. Well, where have they gone?
Yes.
But
well,
the funnies have all sort of packed up their placards in America.
I think they're still upset. I think they're still upset, but it's far worse saying, you know, doom is coming versus actually look at what he actually does, especially in regard to Hamas, which I think we can all be in praise of, saying, you know, release the hostages or doom is coming, you terrorist godfathers. You know.
I love that. You had your sort of internal Ofcom switch at work.
Internal Ofcom switch, yes. Yes.
Sometimes, like Kev on early, he didn't have an internal Ofcom switch.
Did he not?
No.
Sometimes it happens.
It was pre-midday as well. I can understand the internal Ofcom switch dissolving by the time it gets to his show, but it's still morning.
There is one journalist who, which shall remain nameless, who was once referred to by a colleague of ours as a walking Ofcom complaint.
Oh, which one? Is that me? Oh, well, someone who definitely isn't a walking Ofcom complaint is you. You're probably the most professional out of the bunch of us rabble-rousers.
Do you know who's also really professional? And I'm a bit sad today. There's a wonderful producer working on your show today.
Oh, I've already blown smoke up her
I love her.
proverbial.
She's great. Abby is great. She's only been here for a year. She's made a huge impression. She's leaving us, and we just all wish her really, really well.
We do wish her well. She's going to be a huge loss to the team.
Wonderful person.
She's so nice. You walk in and she's like, hello.
Always positive.
Here's all your notes. Here's this. Here's the... She's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, exactly.
I might kidnap her and keep her in my house.
I think...
Is that the Ofcom switch dissolving?
Yeah.
Oh, dear. Now we've got about a minute. Tell us what you're talking about.
Well, I'm very annoyed with the Lady Chief Justice, Baroness